This boy went to take the adventurer exam. On the written test, he got everything wrong, absolutely everything. The evaluators looked at the paper and laughed. Just another clueless country boy. On the practical test, they threw everyone into a forest, archers, mercenaries, experienced warriors. Each one went after what they knew how to do. The boy came back dragging an entire red bear across the ground. Not the claw, not the bile sac, the whole animal, because he didn't know how to extract just the part he needed. The other candidates who were in the forest said they saw him draw his sword, and in an instant, the bear dropped. Nobody saw the strike. The room went silent. But even then, nobody took it seriously. Lucky country boy, they said. In the final stage, the evaluator proposed to fight this unknown kid against two rankers at the same time. On one side, Eddie Markman, prodigy of the most famous archer family in the world, registered in the rankings since the age of 5. On the other, Owl Darkus, the mercenary who single-handedly dismantled an entire criminal organization, took down 7 executives and their boss with his bare hands. Both of them looked at the boy and felt insulted that they had to fight him together. The fight started. Eddie fired the first arrow. The boy dodged and charged at Owl at a speed the crowd could barely follow. The two exchanged blows, defended, attacked. Nobody in the room could clearly see what was happening. Then the boy opened Owl's guard. The finishing blow was coming. Eddie seized the moment and fired an arrow straight at the boy's body. He cut the arrow out of the air with his sword. Without stopping his movement, nobody breathed, and that's when everyone felt it. A dense, heavy aura, green in color, filling the entire room. The evaluator Luke, who had spent his whole life studying rankers and never got excited about any of them, looked at that scene and thought one thing only. This boy is a monster. But what nobody in that room knew was why he was there in the first place. In this world, ranking defines a person's status and fuels their desires. It's a place where power, connections, money, and work mean everything. This is where the journey of a boy from the village of Tori begins. Lo, a 16-year-old, is gathering firewood when a villager approaches to ask for his help. Suddenly, a girl appears and throws the man to the ground, demanding that everyone stop asking Lo to do everything for them. This girl is Yuna, also 16 years old, who's always trying to protect Lo's peace and quiet. She explains that the others treat him like a doormat simply because he acts lazy. But in reality, he's just a kind boy, and that's his biggest problem. Then Yuna asks him to leave the village with her, mentioning a hidden path that no one knows about. However, an old woman interrupts them, reminding them that the village rules forbid anyone from leaving, and she starts to scold Yuna. Yuna's grandmother asks for her to be locked up for a while since the girl was trying to run away. Soon after, another adult approaches and asks Lo to help him get water, and the boy accepts without a second thought. He and Yuna are the only ones the same age in the village, but they're completely different. Someone advises Lo to rest once in a while since he also has his own desires. But even so, the boy decides to keep his promise and help the man fetch water. Lo feels indebted to the villagers because when his parents were gone, he was left all alone. Everyone treated him like family, taking great care of him so he wouldn't feel lonely. That's why he wants to pay them back and likes the people of the village so much. Moved, the adult starts to cry and asks if Lo wants to live at his house. But the boy refuses, stating that the villagers are the most important thing in his life and that the world outside doesn't matter that much to him. Meanwhile, Yuna is locked up, and her grandmother is scolding her for wanting to run away. The girl questions why they can't leave the village since merchants come and go freely. She asks why they're trapped there if the world outside is so much bigger. The old woman replies that it's because they're outcasts, but she doesn't explain the reason why. She only says that one day, time will take care of everything. Elsewhere, while Lo is filling buckets with water, Yuna calls out to him. She managed to escape from her temporary prison, a task that has become easy for her after being caught so many times. She invites him to run away with her, but the boy is afraid that her grandmother will notice and get angry. Yuna insists, saying she wants to show her friends something important. The two of them leave through a hole in a fence and arrive in a forest. For the first time, Lo sees the real outside world and realizes that it's much bigger than his village. Yuna then asks if he knows the rules of the outside world. She reveals that according to a book she secretly took from a merchant, the world out there has a system called ranking. There are adventurers, couriers, doctors, musicians, and various other professions all with their own ranking. Anyone who makes the list is called a ranker. She goes on to explain that even weapons, food, strength, and wealth are ranked, which makes people constantly compete. Lo understands that the outside world also has its own rules. Yuna then reveals her greatest desire, to become a ranked adventurer and travel the world, competing with rivals to become a respected warrior. She says she's made up her mind about her destiny, but Lo insists that he can't leave the village. Yuna invites him to join her on this adventure, but the boy is confused by the request. To convince him, she reminds him of a day when they were 5 years old and a giant bird attacked her. It was Lo who saved her using only a wooden club. He doesn't seem to remember the incident very well, but Yuna assures him it really happened. On that day, she knew that even though he's absent-minded, when Lo really tries, he's stronger than anyone else around him. Yuna told him he would shine much brighter outside the village, and that's why she invited him to explore the world with her. However, Lo refused, insisting he loved his home too much. Since he refused, Yuna declared she would go alone, warning him that he could get stuck in the village forever. Looking back as an adult, Lo realized he'd never really considered that Yuna actually left that day. He stayed outside for a while, thinking about the rankings and everything she had said. When he finally decided to go back, he saw a floating island in the sky. Suddenly, the island shot out a powerful beam of light right in front of him, and then it vanished completely. Terrified, he ran back to his village only to discover it had also been wiped off the map. Everyone he knew, including his grandmother and Yuna, had disappeared without a trace. At that moment, he remembered what Yuna and the other villagers always said. They would tell him he wasn't alone, hugging him and promising they would be a family forever. Overwhelmed by the loss, Lo collapsed to the ground and began to sob uncontrollably. That's when he heard the voice of a warrior who was regretting that he'd arrived too late again. The man approached and asked if the boy was from Tori village, commenting that the situation must have been difficult. While helping him up, the warrior informed him that the island had already disappeared. Lo started bombarding him with questions, but the man cut him off. He handed Lo a piece of paper with a location written on it and told him to forget the village and go there. When Lo pressed him for more answers, the man shouted, stating that the entire village had disappeared and that he should forget the past. He warned that this was the only thing he could do. Otherwise, he would become just another victim. Those words, however, had the opposite effect. In that instant, Lo was certain he could become stronger than anyone. He remembered how when he was little, he saw his parents die in a landslide and was left all alone. It was the villagers, especially Yuna, who took care of him. They were good people who never ignored someone who was hurt, and because of that, he couldn't just forget about them. Angrily, Lo declared that he would go to the flying island and bring everyone back, no matter what it took. Suddenly, Lo began to release an immense amount of energy, which left the man in shock. This energy is known as prana, the mental energy of living beings. It's a power that anyone can have, but few know about it, and only talented individuals can use it consciously. Normally, prana is colorless and invisible, but those who possess a large amount can make it visible. And it's said that some races have a special type of prana. The warrior realized this was the survivor from Babel he was supposed to protect, but he figured the kid would probably get out on his own in a few years anyway. Because of this, he threw his own sword to Lo and challenged him, saying that if he wanted to go to the island, he would have to prove his worth. The man promised that if Lo had potential, he would train him himself. He drew his sword and told the boy to attack him with the intent to kill. Lo charged forward, his green prana flaring, and swung his sword. Because he was a beginner, the attack was technically easy to defend. However, the man felt an immense pressure coming from the blow, as well as waves of prana that were simply absurd. Shocked by the boy's strength, the warrior said to himself that he was a monster. The protagonist's power was so great that the fight was already starting to leave marks on the ground. After the confrontation, the man explained that the island was called the Island of the Gods. Normally, it floats over the vast sea and rarely appears anywhere else. Its function is to erase entire peoples and lands, and he was trying to stop that from happening. He shared a theory that the humans caught in the light might have been taken to the Island of the Gods. Lo immediately wanted to know if he would have been taken too if he had touched the light. The man, however, stressed that it was just a theory. He said that maybe the villagers were alive, but there was no telling what was being done to them. To get there, he explained that there was a direct path, the adventurer rankings. Lo would need to be in the top 10 because those elite adventurers are the ones responsible for exploring and investigating unknown lands. Adal explained that out of all the rankings, the adventure ranking has the most participants, and the top-ranked ones are absolute monsters. To get to the Island of the Gods, which is number 1 on the Dangerous Zones ranking, Lo would need to reach the top 10. The knight then asked if the boy really wanted to go, knowing that almost no adventurer ever comes back alive from there. Without hesitation, Lo said yes. So Adal decided he should start training immediately. The knight promised he would personally teach Lo everything about swords for 1 year. After that period, the boy would have to use that training as a foundation to climb the adventurer rankings on his own. Then, he formally introduced himself as Adal, the number 1 in the knight rankings. At that moment, Lo shook the hand of humanity's strongest warrior. Adal warned that he wouldn't go easy on him since Lo was the first and only person who had managed to cut him, leaving a scar on his chest. The training that followed was brutal. Blisters on Lo's hands and feet burst, muscles tore, bones were crushed, and vital fluid dripped from every opening in his body. After that day, Adal never spoke about the Island of the Gods again, as if he wanted Lo to figure out the rest on his own. This attitude made Lo believe even more strongly that the people of Toki were still alive. He continued his training, clinging to this theory, always wondering about the reason for the village's disappearance. To find out the truth, he needed to reach the top of the adventurer rankings. 1 year later, after training relentlessly, he finally felt ready. Lo remembered what Yuna had said about wanting to become a ranked adventurer. Yuna, who dreamed of the outside world, was gone, and he never imagined he'd be the first to set out on a journey. Now he carried her dream with him. Lo grew a lot in that past year, becoming the disciple of humanity's strongest knight. At that moment, his adventure to the Island of the Gods began. The scene changes to the kingdom of Valtor in the capital city of Trokista. In a branch of the appraisal department, an assistant wakes up a boy named Luke, who was up all night checking the rankings again. She scolds him, saying that as an appraiser, he needs to take care of his own health. After all, unlike her, who just does office work, he's the one who determines people's rankings. Appraisers are sent to every corner of the world to analyze the skills of the rankers. They need to have extensive knowledge and impartial judgment to assess everyone's merit and position, which forces them to go through various tests. It's one of the most demanding jobs that exist, entrusted only to those who are handpicked. Even though he's an appraiser, Luke is still at the lowest level and needs to work hard to climb the rankings and achieve his goals. He knows that, for an appraiser, the fastest way to grow is to become the exclusive agent of a talented ranker. However, Luke still hasn't found a ranker he likes enough to dedicate himself to exclusively. He says he's not picky, but he thinks the current rankers are boring. In the past, the competition was more fierce, but now the top spots of all the rankings are locked in. As someone addicted to rankings, Luke believes their value lies in constant updates. That's why he wonders if there's a promising new star who can turn everything upside down. His assistant suggests that this promising ranker might be in the classroom they're observing. It's the 3rd time this year that they're holding the registration exam for the adventurer rankings. The number of applicants has increased because the Azaban Forest entered the Dangerous Zones ranking 2 months ago. She comments that there are a lot of promising people like Old Arcs. Despite having a low number in the mercenary rankings, he's the leader of the Red Wolf Group, a very promising newcomer from the country. Besides him, there's also Ed Markman from the Archer rankings. The Markman family is famous for their archery. His father was number 2, and his brother is in 7th place. They say that even at his young age, the speed of Ed's arrow already reaches double digits. Besides them, there are others who look good, including a trade ranker and a sailor. As an experienced evaluator, Luke recognizes most of the promising faces just by looking at them. He understands the adventurer ranking has become especially useful now that so many people are trying to join because of new dangerous zones like the recently classified forest. However, their conversation is cut short by the sound of a bell, which makes the assistant check where the noise is coming from. She sees Lo registering for the adventurer ranking and takes the chance to explain that the system is managed by the evaluation department. This department sends evaluators all over the country to validate the achievements of ranked members. While ranking updates can be done anywhere, the initial registration has to happen at an official agency. Our hero then walks up to take the exam. He hands over the money, fills out the required information, and waits in the room after getting his registration number. To the shock of Luke and the receptionist, the guy shows he has absolutely no idea what the evaluation department is. Ignoring that for now, Luke helps the secretary prepare for the exam by taking care of the paperwork. Soon after, the registration exam for the adventurer ranking begins. It consists of a written test, a practical test, and a final surprise test. The final score determines who passes, and it's explained that even if someone fails one part, a high score in the others can make up for it, so no one should give up. With the rules explained, the aspiring adventurers begin the written test. The material turns out to be extremely complex, and the subject matter is very broad, making things difficult for everyone. 2 hours later, the woman announces the end of the written test and informs them that the practical will begin in another 2 hours. While the candidates are resting, the secretary grabs the pile of papers and asks Luke to help her grade the tests. With a grim look on her face, she picks up the protagonist's test and realizes he got every single question wrong. Luke, on the other hand, is annoyed that he has to grade the ridiculous tests from these country bumpkins. After the 2 hours are up, the practical test begins and it's a kind of treasure hunt. The participants have to turn in the items listed on a form, and each item is worth a specific number of points. They're encouraged to get items that are worth a lot of points, but they're strictly forbidden from fighting each other. Since each applicant is good at collecting a different type of item, the test kicks off with everyone running like crazy through the forest. Watching from a distance, Luke and the secretary guess that about half of the adventurers will pass. They notice from their movements that the group seems more prepared this time. However, no one really catches Luke's eye until their conversation is interrupted. A boy shows up carrying a piece of regaler, becoming the first person to turn in an item. Satisfied, he decides to stop the test, thinking he'll get enough points with just that one but he's told that he could get a better ranking if he kept going. Right after that, another boy arrives, frustrated because he thought he was the first one back. He hunted down a flew bird feather, which is worth 180 points. A mercenary standing next to him scoffs, saying he's getting cocky over a simple bird feather. In response, the boy brags, explaining that those birds fly at 500 kilometers per hour and can't be seen with the naked eye. With that, a pointless rivalry sparks between the two. They start arguing for no apparent reason, driven only by their pride and inflated egos. Their argument is suddenly cut short when the protagonist arrives, dragging an entire bear and surprising everyone. He explains that he brought the whole body because he didn't know how to extract the animal's gallbladder, an item that's worth 300 points. Everyone is in shock, unable to believe he defeated a red bear all by himself. Luke questions him, asking how he managed to recognize a red bear even though he got a terrible score on the written test. The protagonist answers simply, saying that these bears show up a lot in his village and that he's very familiar with them. Other candidates who saw him fighting confirm his story, but they admit they didn't actually see what happened because he just drew his sword. And in an instant, the bear was down. 1 hour later, everyone gathers in the underground training center for the final stage. Luke addresses the group and asks if they know who adventurers should always be wary of. He answers his own question, saying the biggest threats are beasts and other humans. After all, an adventurer's mission involves exploring new lands and isolated regions where the most common threats are usually bandits or pirates. Because of this, the final test is a mock battle where the candidates will fight each other. Luke tells them not to get nervous as it's just to evaluate their skills and explains the rules weren't revealed earlier to prevent anyone from cheating on the practical exam. Immediately, a big guy provokes the mercenary, claiming he only picked up a rock in the test and that mercenaries are just loud-mouthed bullies. He tries to attack, but the mercenary simply grabs his sword and hits him with a pommel strike, knocking him out with a single blow. The secretary allows the victory because of his scores. Besides, it would be stupid to try for a comeback since his third-class rank means he's a monster. Luke then decides to propose a specific battle, and the woman allows it. After a few fights, she announces match number 8. Eddie, the archer who hunted the bird, and the mercenary will fight together against the protagonist. The mercenary and the archer think they're being underestimated by Luke, but he insists his eyes don't make mistakes and that the rookie is a monster. The two of them position themselves in front of the hero. The mercenary introduces himself as Owl Darkus, leader of the Red Wolf group. Last year, his group made a name for themselves in the tests by eradicating the Khmer Mafia from the criminal organization rankings. Rumor has it the young leader defeated 7 executives and the boss all by himself. The boy, on the other hand, is Eddie Markman, the young heir of the Markman family of archers. Trained since childhood by his father, who was once the number 2 ranked archer, Eddie was registered in the rankings at just 5 years old and is considered a talented prodigy. Now the two of them are facing an unknown but very strong young man. As soon as the fight begins, Markman fires an arrow, but the protagonist dodges it and rushes toward Darkies, starting a sword clash. They exchange several blows at high speed, with both skillfully defending themselves so fast that the other fighters can't even follow the action. At one point, our hero manages to push Darkis' arm back, opening up his guard to land a blow on his chest. Seizing the opportunity, Eddie fires another arrow in his direction. Surprisingly, the protagonist manages to cut the arrow out of the air with his sword, stopping the attack and leaving everyone in complete shock. No one has ever seen him before, but everyone starts to think he must be among the top-ranked knights. That's when our hero finds out his opponents are ranked in other categories. Markman is number 402 among archers, and Darkis is number 753 among mercenaries. Realizing this, the protagonist declares that if he defeats them both, he'll reach a 3-digit rank. Suddenly, he releases an absurd aura that fills the entire dueling hall, and Luke notices that it's prana, so dense that you can see the color of his aura with the naked eye. Markman tries to sound tough, stating that the rankings aren't just for professions, and that in the sniper ranking, which evaluates precision, he's in the 78th position. However, as he prepares to fire an arrow after saying this, he simply collapses to the ground, defeated. Darkis is in shock since he couldn't even see the move that took him down. Then, the swordsman starts walking slowly toward him, emanating a green prana. Suddenly, our hero disappears and reappears behind him. Upon feeling the cold blade of the sword on his neck, Darkis gives up, explaining that he has to work later and doesn't want to get knocked out like Eddie Markman. He admits the protagonist is a monster and wonders who he really is. Everyone in the room is shocked as he defeated 2 3-digit rankers all by himself. Officially, it's announced that the winner is candidate number 3. Immediately, Luke runs over to his computer and opens the exclusive evaluators list of rankers. He finds the profile of 17-year-old Lo Tuli and notes that he has no prior record. This makes sense with his story about coming from a very remote village and confirms he isn't a criminal or a member of any special cult. Luke felt like he just hit the lottery by finding a hidden talent like that, so he rushed off to offer his services as an exclusive appraiser. He asked Lo to be his ranker, but he quickly realized other appraisers had the same idea and were already trying to convince the swordsman. For a moment, Luke thought he was too late and that he should have investigated someone's background before making an offer. To his surprise, our hero didn't even know what an exclusive appraiser was, so Luke stepped up to explain. He clarified that an exclusive appraiser is someone dedicated to a single ranker whose job is to update their ranking regularly. Normally, you'd have to wait for the appraisal department to send someone. But with an exclusive appraiser, the update happens on the spot, anywhere. This advantage is highly valued by adventurers who are always traveling. Besides, exclusive appraisers always have the most up-to-date information. So if Lo wanted to climb the ranks quickly, hiring one was the best way to go. Hearing the proposal, our protagonist set one condition for accepting their help. He wanted to know if any of the appraisers there could get him into the top 10 of the adventurer ranking. The other appraisers backed off, explaining that excellent swordsmanship alone wasn't enough to get that far. Hearing this, our hero simply turned his back and started to walk away, but Luke ran after him, desperate. Calling out to Lo, the young appraiser asked why he wanted to get into the top 10 of that specific ranking so badly. Our hero replied that it was none of his business, but Luke insisted that it was. He declared that he would become his exclusive appraiser and help him reach his goal. Lo, however, refused, saying he didn't want to put a child in danger. Luke retorted that before being a child, he was an official appraiser. Even so, Lo stood his ground, explaining that he had no intention of hiring anyone because he didn't want to involve more people in his mission. That's when Luke shouted that he also had something he needed to do, a mission he wanted to complete even if it cost him his life, and that's why he wanted to team up with Lo. The intensity in his words made the swordsman remember the ambition he himself had a year ago when he decided to go to the island to save everyone. Understanding the boy's determination, he gave in, saying that he also had something very important to do. Luke then formally introduced himself and promised he would guide him to become one of the best in the ranking. Convinced, Lothuli shook his hand, sealing the deal. Soon after, they went to a very nice room that Luke had already rented for them to use as a base for a few days. Our hero praised Luke's skills, and Luke replied confidently that getting that room had been easy. The young appraiser then declared that he would prove his competence within a week, and that unlike before, Lo would be begging him to be his exclusive appraiser. Luke observed that although Lo was an incredible fighter, he seemed a bit out of it outside of battles. A short time later, the test results came out. Lo's new rank was position 2728. Luke congratulated him on passing the registration test, stating that getting into the 2000s was already a great start. Lo, however, was disappointed as he expected to be in the triple digits. After all, he had defeated 2 opponents who were at that level. Luke explained that the adventurer ranking had a lot more people, so the competition was tougher. He said that no matter how strong someone was, there was a limit to their starting position. However, he revealed that Lo had other impressive rankings, like 58th place in sword speed, which in the appraisal department's view was the true representation of his talent. Luke continued, explaining that the 2 men he faced also had rankings in several other categories. Old Arcs, for example, held positions in the cleaning, informant, and reliable boss rankings, while Eddie Markman was in the sniper, reconnaissance, and even mushroom cultivation rankings. Being in multiple rankings made it easier to get jobs, which is why he suggested Lo register for others too. Lo, however, stated he wasn't looking for jobs. Luke understood immediately, realizing that Lo's only goal was to get into the top 10 as quickly as possible so he could then go to the Island of the Gods. He knew this because that was the only special privilege granted to the top 10 in the adventurer ranking. Lo suggested he tell his reason after the trial period, and Luke agreed to share his as well, making it a fair deal between the 2 of them. Then Luke admitted there was a reason that was difficult to explain to a newcomer, but that he was investigating the dark side of the rankings. Curious, he asked where Lo's power and swordsmanship came from, since it clearly wasn't something you could learn overnight. Lo then explained that a year ago, he became the disciple of a knight named Adel. The news left Luke in shock because Adel was none other than the #1 knight in the world. Lo confirmed that even though he was his disciple, he was only with him for 1 year. Luke considered the information a bombshell. After all, Adel was famous for never teaching swordsmanship to anyone, having turned down countless training requests over the years. The general belief was that Adel was waiting to pass on his techniques to the highest-ranked knight of the next generation. Because of this, a crowd of knights was desperately trying to climb the ranks in hopes of being trained by him. Luke commented that the other knights would freak out if they knew Lo had inherited Adel's techniques. Lo, for his part, admitted he never imagined his master was actually the strongest man in humanity, just like he'd always claimed. Luke clarified that being #1 meant being the strongest in the world. It was then that Lo revealed something even more surprising. He had defeated Adel with his sword once, and the knight himself admitted that Lo was the first person to ever land a hit on him. Luke was stunned to hear such bombshells coming from someone with such a deadpan expression. He checked the rankings database, and since the name Thule had never appeared before, he asked if it was a disguise. Lo explained that he didn't have a last name due to a cultural difference. It was Adel who told him to adopt the last name Thule, so he could go to the Island of the Gods. He warned him that the risk would be high, but if he did well, some clues would naturally come his way. The boy stated it wasn't a disguise, but the name of his dear family. With that, Luke finished his work as an assessor for the day and took off his hat. At that moment, Lo finally noticed that Luke was actually a woman. She got angry that he hadn't noticed sooner, but Lo quickly apologized. Satisfied with her new client's realization, Luke invited him to get some coffee, marking the first step of a long journey together. With their partnership established, they came up with a strategy for Lo to reach the top 10 of the adventurer rankings. To climb the ranks, he needed achievements. And although territory development and exploration were the basics, Luke recommended that he start by accepting missions. She explained that many people needed the strength of adventurers for gathering and investigation, and that these missions offered rewards, making them ideal for beginners. He could accept missions through the assessment department or a guild. To make it easier, she showed him the rank cell, a handy device for finding tasks. Luke offered him unlimited use of the device if he accepted her as his exclusive assessor. Lo thought about the offer and asked if there was a mission that could boost his rank significantly all at once. Luke then showed him the department's most difficult missions, which clearly indicated how much they would influence the rankings. Without hesitating, Lo chose the first one on the list. A mission with a 6-skull difficulty in a level 7 danger zone. Retrieve the treasure from the sunken temple of Luciana. The assessor was firm, stating that at his current level, he wouldn't stand a chance in that dungeon and that he should trust her expert eyes. She insisted that the mission was way too difficult and that he would die before he even had a chance to rank up. However, looking at her very seriously, the hero declared that he wanted to try since his final goal, the island of the gods, was the #1 danger zone. If he backed down now, he'd have no chance of ever getting there. Realizing that Lo was much more stubborn than she had imagined, Luke started to think of another way to convince him. It was at that moment that a man in a suit appeared, asking if they were having some kind of problem. Luke recognized him instantly and introduced him as Laud Broward. Laud Broward was a powerhouse adventurer, ranked 11th in the fiercely competitive general rankings. Lo knew the man was a monster, just as Adel had warned. He was an elite hunter, and if he moved up just one more rank, he'd be able to challenge the dreaded island of the gods. Seizing the opportunity, Luke asked Liuda for help in dealing with the stubborn rookie. This talk, however, was going to be a duel, so they headed to an arena. Once there, the 11th ranked adventurer grabbed a makeshift weapon that looked a little too light for him. Our protagonist introduced himself formally, but his opponent quickly cut him off, saying that in the adventurer rankings, nobody cared about formalities. Loud mentioned that Luke had recently updated the rankings. He said that on top of her vast knowledge, she had a rare conviction for creating precise classifications, a passion that was unusual among evaluators. Since it was a direct request from her, he was willing to go all out and teach the rookie a lesson. Just by looking at him, our hero could feel Loud's strength. He hesitated to move forward, sensing he'd be impaled by the spear. Watching from a distance, Luke thought this was Lo's golden opportunity to understand how big the world really was, but the boy already knew that. He remembered his village being abducted by the island of the gods. With his determination renewed, rank number 2728 charged at rank number 11. He attacked with his sword and Liuda defended with the makeshift spear. Then, Lo unleashed a powerful aura-infused slash, but his opponent dodged it easily. Loud noticed the boy channeled prana into his sword and released it in a single strike. He was also using the same energy in his hands and feet to increase his agility. The swordsmanship belonged to the Sword Saint style, a secret technique passed down only among successors, and he couldn't believe a child had mastered it. Realizing he was overthinking it, Liuda refocused on the fight just in time to see the hero trying an attack from behind. Lo struck at the adventurer's back, but Liuda dodged by simply tossing his spear backward. Calmly, Liuda started moving and attacking at the same time, noting that Lo's prana was greater than his own even though the boy was so young. As they fought at high speed amidst an intense glow of energy, the rank 11 adventurer asked what Lo's race was. Lo didn't understand the question. Liuda stated that his prana glow wasn't something you could acquire over time. He added that if he had to, he'd find out the boy's race the hard way. Realizing the young man could also use enchantments, Laudi planted his spear in the ground and began to chant. The furious horse of the crags crosses mountains gasping for air. The sunlight makes the sacred tree bloom once more. The turbulent waters meet and peace shatters into shards. As he leaped, he activated the Wind Tribe's enchantment, warning Lo that he would die if he didn't defend himself. The attack manifested as several spiritual spears that shot toward our protagonist. He tried to defend himself with his sword and prana, but his enemy warned him that an ordinary blade couldn't block that enchantment. Our hero managed to dodge most of them, but took a few spectral hits to the stomach. He then remembered Adel telling him his prana control was still raw, but that once he got used to it, he would learn the techniques little by little. At that moment, he remembered the first and most basic technique, the shimmering blade. Mimicking the #1 knight's pose, our hero unleashed an extremely strong and fast gale of prana at his enemy. However, Laudi simply spun his spear and completely cancelled the attack. Seizing the opening, the protagonist lunged forward with a low slash, a cut so fast it was invisible to the naked eye. Even so, Loud managed to dodge and counterattack, throwing an energy spear that sent the boy flying. He admitted the young man was admirable, but there was a huge gap in power between them. With a snap of his fingers, Loud made thousands of magical golden spears appear in the air, hovering over the hero. He warned Lo never to underestimate the adventurer rankings, and then he launched the devastating attack. Seeing thousands of spears heading his way, our hero felt that he had truly lost the fight. As the hero lay defeated on the ground, the winner of the fight, Laud Broward, was announced. Luke commented that Lo must now understand the power difference between them, and Laud, in turn, asked if she had really believed in the kid until the very end. She admitted that she thought it might be possible, especially since he was Adel's disciple. Laud then revealed that the moment he saw the high-speed slash, he recognized it as the Sword Saint style, and he wondered how that was even possible. The Sword Saint style is an incredibly powerful swordsmanship passed down to a single successor and inherited by elite knights for generations. The fact that an adventurer like the kid had inherited it was shocking. From a knight's point of view, it was as if he had stolen something sacred. That's why Luke thought it would be best for him to avoid conflicts with other knights from now on, as it would be smart if he didn't want to end up getting eliminated. If he acted like a knight, the problem could be solved, but that was impossible since he really wanted to be an adventurer. Actually, Luke's reason for believing in Lo went beyond the Sword Saint style. It was because he said he landed a hit and she believed him. Laud thought it was impossible for him to have landed a hit at his current level. But Luke, although she also had her doubts, didn't rule out the possibility because she knew Lo wasn't the type to lie. The man agreed that must be the reason. After all, besides the shocking style, the glow of prana the boy gave off was also very impressive. Luke added that he also possessed enchantments, and Laud concluded that if he had used them, he could have actually won. In the middle of this conversation, a scene from the past flashed through the hero's mind. A woman was singing in his house until an old woman appeared, yelling at her because of the poem and claiming it was his fault they couldn't get out of that situation. The woman then apologized to Lo. At that exact moment, he woke up in a hospital bed, confused after the dreams of his hidden past. Luke explained that he was in the infirmary of the evaluation department and that he had been sleeping all day. According to the doctor, it seemed to be accumulated mental exhaustion. Not quite understanding what was going on, Luke asked if he wasn't pushing himself too hard in training, thinking about everything he'd been through. The protagonist admitted she was right. Luke then said she had something important to tell him and asked if he knew what enchantments were. Our protagonist said no, and she began to explain. Enchantments are a special way of using prana, something that only a few races can do naturally. Although many high-ranking adventurers have also mastered the skill. Curious, the hero asked if Laud was one of those cases. Luke confirmed, explaining that he's a warrior from the Broward tribe, a race focused on combat and hunting that lives in swampy regions. Since their techniques are passed down orally in the form of poems, they became known as enchantments. Also, because there's a genetic component, it's very difficult to learn them as an adult. Laud's enchantment really surprised the protagonist. However, Luke revealed something even more shocking. He also had enchantments inside him. She then asked if he had any idea what he was carrying. The boy just guessed it was something powerful enough to be a major asset as a ranker. Confident, Luke stated that he had the potential to become a high-ranking adventurer, and that's exactly why she chose a perfect mission for him in his rank cell. The mission was an investigation in the Azaben forest located in a hazardous zone. Officially, it was an ecological survey, but the job wasn't just about studying animals. In fact, several people had recently disappeared in the area, and the adventurers who took on this same mission vanished without a trace. Luke explained that at first, only lower-ranked adventurers were disappearing in the forest. However, the situation got worse when even an adventurer ranked at position 800 vanished without a trace. She revealed that if Lo could figure out what was behind these disappearances, he could jump 200 spots in the rankings all at once. However, the risk was proportional to the reward. Without any hesitation, Lewis accepted the mission, and Luke made it clear she only recommended him because she believed in his abilities. She then registered the mission in the rank cell and gave an important warning about the Azaben forest. The area is home to protected species and has many restricted zones. Luke assured him that with her by his side, everything should go smoothly, but he would need to be extremely cautious. The boy then asked what would happen if he broke the rules. Luke replied that his rank would drop drastically. She explained that no matter how skilled an adventurer is, destroying the ecosystem or failing a mission seriously damages their reputation, and the ranking system is built on credibility. Excited, she concluded that this mission marked the beginning of a new chapter in their journey. It was the first step toward a rapid climb in the adventurer rankings. Stating that they would do their best by working as a team, she convinced him to set off. Together, they headed toward the Azaben forest. Meanwhile, in another part of the same forest, a man was finishing off another adventurer. He commented that the evaluation department didn't care about weaklings like the one he had just killed. To him, trying to climb the ranks the conventional way was foolish. The mysterious man approached a Unihasser, a creature with a valuable horn. He knew that a single horn from that creature would be enough to quickly boost him into the 3-digit ranks. He reflected that brute force doesn't guarantee a higher rank and that the system exists at the expense of those who suffer from injustice. His name was Rosso Cruel, ranked 7th among smugglers. Looking around the area, he decided he wouldn't abandon such a promising hunting ground. His goal was clear: to reach the top 100. His next target was already set: Dalcan Iris, the adventurer ranked at position 672. When Lewis arrived at the forest entrance, a knight checked his rank, recognizing him as adventurer number 2728. Once he was allowed in, he asked how many people were in the adventurer rankings. The guard informed him that there were around 30,000, but only 20,000 were active. She commented that his stats didn't seem to match his rank. She explained that a person's adventurer rank is often very different from their other rankings. For example, someone with a 4-digit adventurer rank could be in the 3-digit range in another specialty. The guard continued, saying that the higher someone's adventurer rank is, the higher their other ranks tend to be as well. Lewis thought about this, remembering that his swordsmanship rank was already in the 2-digit range. This made him stronger than the opponents he faced in the exam. However, he wanted to get even stronger, and that was the only thing on his mind. Just then, Luke announced that their journey into the forest would begin now. They entered the Azabon Forest, danger zone number 48. Almost immediately, Lewis felt something strange. With a single glance, he finally sensed the danger of the place, a feeling that only experienced adventurers can pick up on. An ordinary person would never notice it, and that was why a ranking for dangerous zones existed. Luke explained that the forest was added to the ranking because a huge outbreak of demonic beasts was discovered in the area 2 months ago. The exact moment she finished speaking, bizarre monsters appeared and charged at them. Luke said that now it was Lewis's turn to protect her. Without a second thought, the hero unleashed a slash and began taking out the creatures. He leaped up, grabbed a monstrous bird by its beak, and slammed it to the ground. Next, he launched a gale slash with his green prana, and the energy wiped out the remaining enemies in a single attack. He remembered Adel, the man who taught him the gale technique. Our protagonist had learned a few techniques, but he couldn't use all of them yet. He felt that maybe, just maybe, he could use the second one now. Suddenly, a blood orc, one of the most dangerous creatures in the rankings, appeared before them. Lewis decided this was the perfect opportunity to test if he could unleash Adel's second technique. He began to emanate an overwhelming amount of prana using the half-lotus technique and striking the blood orc with an X-shaped slash. The blow hit its target, but it didn't seem to have any effect on the creature, which prepared to counterattack. In response, Lewis panicked and started running away, yelling that his attack had failed. He really thought it was going to work, leaving Luke in shock since he was the one who was supposed to be protecting her. Running for their lives, they found themselves at the edge of a cliff. Without a second to think, Lewis took a huge leap, holding Luke under his arms as they fell toward the ground. Despite the scare, they landed safely without any injuries. Even so, Luke was terrified and complained that he should have warned her before doing something so dangerous. Lewis just explained that his master trained him that way and it had become a habit for him. Finally, they reached the center of the forest, the area they needed to investigate to complete their mission. Luke explained that ever since the Azabon Forest was ranked as a dangerous zone, she had already explored 80% of the area. The remaining 20% where they were now was a nest of monsters and had therefore remained unexplored. Looking at the various mystical creatures and exotic plants in the area, Lewis commented that it was the first time he'd ever seen anything like it. In that moment, he finally understood what it meant to be an adventurer, remembering the dream his sister, Yuna, had her entire life. Suddenly, Lewis noticed some movement and drew his sword to attack, but Luke quickly stopped him, pointing out that it was an injured creature. She wondered what the best way to approach the animal would be, identifying it as a royal horn, the number 4 beast on the ranking of rare and nearly extinct species. Seeing that the animal was hurt, Luke decided she would help it since she had learned basic first aid to take care of Hunter, and also Lewis himself when he got beat up by Lotta. Luke then told Lewis they would set up a base in that area for the day. As an agent of the evaluation department, she couldn't just abandon a creature like that. She made sure to state that taking care of a royal horn was part of an ecological research and that he shouldn't get the wrong idea as if she were choosing the animal over him. So the two of them set up camp in the forest to rest. While they were sleeping around the campfire, Lewis took the opportunity to continue training his prana sword skills. He tried once more to unleash the half-lotus technique against a tree, but even though the blast of prana flew far, it had no effect when it hit the trunk. Frustrated, he lay down on the ground, completely exhausted, realizing he hadn't accomplished anything. At this rate, he would never reach the island of the gods, and he knew he needed to get stronger, fast. Mr. Lout's words about him having enchantments came back to his mind. Louis meditated, trying to understand what it meant until he eventually fell asleep. He didn't wake up until the next day when the sunlight hit his eyes. Luke was already awake because the creature had started thrashing around in the middle of the night. The royal horn was agitated and was growling at something in the distance. Despite this, it recovered very quickly thanks to the proper treatment. Luke explained that since it was still a baby, it would normally get attached to people. But this one was skittish, just as she suspected someone had hurt it on purpose. To prove it, she showed Louis the broken part of its horn, which clearly indicated an attack by an illegal hunter. She went on to explain that the beast's horn is considered a type of miracle cure. For that reason, they were captured relentlessly, which led to them being listed as a rare species. Even with hunting being banned, the demand didn't disappear, and poachers continue to operate in secret. On the black market, the horn is sold as if it were from a unicorn. Just then, the royal horn creature tried to attack Luke, but our hero protected her, blocking its horn with his sword. Startled, the animal started to run away from Louis. Luke immediately went after it, worried because it wasn't 100 recovered yet. She commented that until now, there had been no record of a royal horn in the Azaban forest. So following it was part of her ecological research. Louis said he would also go on ahead after the creature. After all, the zone's ranking would go up if they found this exotic monster. Luke then told him to track it secretly through the area. The creature proved to be very fast and was soon out of sight, but Louis kept following the tracks it left behind. He was making his way through the forest when suddenly he was attacked and forced to stop running. The man who attacked him appeared before him, saying that this was a hunter's lucky day. Lo countered the attack and their swords clashed in a head-on confrontation. During the fight, our hero unleashed a prana strike that almost hit the enemy. When he saw the color of that energy, the man was so shocked that he immediately stopped fighting and raised his arms to surrender. That's when Lo recognized his opponent's voice, and looking closer, he noticed a kid with a bow and arrow on a nearby branch. He finally realized it was Eddie and Owl, the two he had faced in the academy duel. The scene shifts to the next day during the adventurer ranking registration. When the receptionist asked which ranking he had chosen, Lo confirmed that he chose the adventurer ranking. Coincidentally, Ed was also there to pick up a mission, and that's when the two met. As rivals, they stared each other down in silence for a while in a contest to see who would speak first. Finally, Ed broke the silence and asked if Lo had found out anything about the swordsman who defeated them. Lo answered that he had, but he didn't have any concrete information. He revealed that as hard as it was to believe, the swordsman had no rank at all before that fight. Ed confessed that even though it might not seem like it, he was considered a prodigy in the archery rankings. Because of that, losing so badly to an unranked rookie completely crushed his pride. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Captain Owl was being congratulated by his band of mercenaries. He told them he had also registered for the adventure rankings, and everyone celebrated his arrival. They bet that he had done well and given the other candidates a hard time. However, Owl revealed that's not quite what happened, admitting that he lost the fight. His group didn't believe him, saying he must have held back, so he wouldn't hurt his opponent. After all, someone with a 3-digit rank among mercenaries would never lose to a rookie. At that moment, filled with rage, Owl slammed his fist on a table and broke it. He was furious with the rookie who didn't even look him in the face, feeling that Lo Tuli had treated him with disdain as if he were just a stepping stone. Because of this, he declared that starting the next day, they would triple their training, leaving everyone in shock. One of the girls in the group mentioned she wanted to take on new missions, but Captain Owl said that wasn't enough. He declared that the world was much bigger than they imagined and that he would start training for real again. Later, while talking with Ed, Owl admitted that his pride was also hurt by Lo in the battle. He hadn't planned on focusing on the adventurer rankings, but he refused to feel looked down on like that. This was especially true because they both already had high rankings in other categories, which really shook their egos. They compared their positions. Ed's adventurer rank was 6,725, while Owl's was 6,301. To their surprise, the rank of Lo, the man who defeated them, was 2,728. Seeing they were almost 4,000 positions behind, they believed it would be easy to climb the ranks and surpass him. With the same goal in mind, they decided to take on a mission together and chose the Azaban Forest. It had recently been added to the list of dangerous zones and was great for gaining experience. That's why the two of them went there and ended up running into Lo. Back in the present in the forest, Lo said they would talk later and started running without wasting any time. While sheathing his sword, he explained that the royal horn was injured. Ed and Owl immediately understood that he wanted to protect the beast that had been attacked by hunters. They followed him, keeping up with his extremely fast pace. During the chase, the young archer explained that to move through the forest, you had to use the uneven terrain to your advantage, using pieces of rock to jump off of and increase your speed. Watching the technique, our hero immediately copied the move and managed to speed up his run as well. Suddenly, they spotted another beast that had captured the royal horn, wrapping it up in its tongue. Without hesitating, the two of them drew their weapons to save the creature. Lo rushed forward and landed a precise cut on the monster's tongue, injuring it. Realizing he couldn't get any closer for a second attack, he prepared to use long-range slashes. However, Lo decides against it since the royal horn would also be hit by his long-range attacks. Instead, he asks if Ed can create an opening and without hesitating, tells the archer to aim for the creature's eyes while he keeps running. Ed obeys, and the moment he fires 2 arrows, they hit the monster right in the eyes. The creature screams in agony, and right after, Lo tells Ed to aim for its legs. Meanwhile, our protagonist slides across the ground and pulls his arm back to charge up energy. He then prepares a sword strike, unleashing a powerful slash with his prana enveloping the blade. At that exact moment, Owl cuts through a tree trunk, which starts to fall on top of the monster. The giant tree hits the enormous purple beast, finishing off the creature, and allowing them to save the royal horn together. After the battle, the mercenary captain states that he's used to ordering subordinates around, which makes Ed angry for being called one. Despite their anger, they acknowledge that Lo's swordsmanship is incredible, but they figure that's not enough to reach the top 10. They realize that just defeating creatures to climb the adventure rankings isn't enough, and that Lo needs to learn other skills besides swordsmanship to truly stand out. A little later, Luke finally arrives and apologizes to Lo for being late, asking what the hell had just happened there. She explains that she thought they were illegal hunters, but luckily, it was all just a misunderstanding that was cleared up quickly. Luke expresses her relief that Lo didn't just attack like a madman and instead resolved the situation by talking. Then she jokes that she'll have to lower their rank, but quickly clarifies that it's a joke. However, she warns that just because he held back, next time she'll lower their rank for real. Hearing the threat, the two boys, who almost lost their rank, promise they'll be more careful. Curious, Ed asks why Lo brought an evaluator with him, and our hero replies that it's easier to climb the ranks that way. Owl, however, disagrees and thinks it's the same as being watched 24 hours a day. He doesn't like the idea, arguing that it'll just mean more work for Lo, like cleaning duty, and that most of the time they'll just make him risk his life every day. Owl concludes that this will happen because Lo is being used for other people's interests. Lo then asks why the evaluators would want him to improve so much. Owl replies that it's the only way for them to get promoted since evaluators move up in rank whenever they update the rankings. In other words, adventurers whose ranks climb quickly are an easy way for evaluators to get a promotion. He tells Lo to watch out, stating that Luke is using him as a stepping stone to get ahead. Hearing this, Lo becomes doubtful. He wonders if she would really do something like that since she doesn't seem like the type of person to act that way. At that moment, their conversation is interrupted when Luke finishes scouting the area and declares that the coast is clear. Suddenly, the royal horn monster approaches and starts rubbing against her as if they've become friends, but the creature shows no concept of personal space. Ed and Owl don't find the scene cute at all and comment that the animal is being ungrateful. However, Luke explains that it's acting this way because of how intimidating the two of them were, adding that Lo has a scary aura even though he didn't do anything wrong. Luke then changes the subject, mentioning that the magic beast they defeated has been causing a lot of trouble. She reveals that they had never come across this predator before since its natural habitats are cold places, and there are no records of it ever existing in the Azaban forest. Because of this, she and Lo came to the region on a reconnaissance mission. Next, Luke asks what Ed and Owl are doing there, and Owl replies that they were on a similar mission that they picked up from the department. Luke is surprised since she didn't expect there to be missions for mercenaries and archers in the forest. She realizes her presence must have influenced them to take on a mission just to climb the ranks. Realizing this, she decides to change the mood and share some good news with Lo, saying she has something important for him. She reveals that his speed ranking has been updated. The sword technique he used was so fast that she already requested to have the feat added to the rankings. Luke explains that thanks to his technique, Lo has reached the 26th spot on the speed ranking, which is a combination of several others. He's visibly happy with the news, recognizing that he used a technique that's hard to see with the naked eye. Even though to regular people it might not look like much. Lo is sure he did well since he was just acting on pure instinct. Impressed, he asks if Luke is always this amazing, and she takes the chance to brag a bit about helping him move up in the rankings. At that moment, Lo decides to be honest with Ed and Owl, which leaves Owl a little annoyed. The young swordsman confesses that there's something they need to know. He admits he's not good at absolutely anything that doesn't involve his sword. The two of them realize the kid has dedicated his entire life just to sword training. Lo explains that during the fight, it was Ed who saved him because he didn't know how to keep up with the pace of fighting as a team. Owl then explains that his instinct for command is natural since, as the leader of a mercenary group, he constantly has to come up with plans so he doesn't lose his men. He explains that formations, instructions, everyone's positioning, and deciding who delivers the final blow are all vital in an attack. Owl asks if Lo is interested in learning about this, but adds that his swordsmanship is already good enough and he might not need his advice. Even so, Lo insists and asks them to teach him everything since he knows he needs more skills to survive. They agree to give him some tips on how to move through the forest, explaining that he needs to use all 5 of his senses. Seeing Lo's determination, Luke feels proud of his progress and is happy to be helping him. Despite this moment of bonding, Luke can't help but feel that the presence of illegal hunters and an unidentified demonic beast is terrifying. She feels like something is very wrong in the Azaban forest and worries this mission might be too much for the team to handle. Meanwhile, the 2 illegal hunters who were looking for the missing beast end up finding Lo's group. One of them, Iris, comments that their organs will be fresh and worth a fortune. Even though they're no match for the beast, she decides to capture them anyway, saying that anyone who enters a beast's territory should expect to be torn to shreds. Back with the group, Ed starts the lesson, explaining that using all 5 senses isn't an easy task. He says that using sight, hearing, smell, and even taste in combat requires proper training. He says the forest is the perfect place for it since the smells of the plants and animals are so strong there. Owl admits he doesn't really get the plan, and Ed teases him, saying it must be hard for a mercenary to get used to anything besides the smell of blood. To demonstrate, Ed reveals that he can sense exactly how many animals are around them right now, even while keeping his prana flow low. He explains that prana is a fluid talent that allows a person to focus their perception. This lets them sharpen one of their chosen senses. Encouraged, Lo starts to focus his prana on his perception of the environment. Suddenly, he starts giving off a huge amount of energy, shocking everyone with the sudden burst of power. The prana spreads out quickly, sharpening all 5 of his senses at once. It allows him to see everything around him, including one of the illegal hunters from the dreads hiding nearby. Immediately, Lo grabs his sword and prepares to attack, warning Luke that someone is watching them. But just as he says someone is getting closer, he's hit by a devastating punch. The blow is so powerful it sends Lo flying, causing him to crash through several trees before he hits the ground, apparently passed out from the pain. The illegal hunter who attacked him appears, complaining loudly about who was leaking prana all over the place and calling it disgusting. He then reveals that this uncontrolled energy is exactly what allowed him to track the group so easily. Right away, the mercenary and the archer draw their weapons, preparing for battle. However, Luke stops them, revealing that their opponent is Dalkin Iris, number 672 in the adventurer rankings. The information leaves everyone in shock. Since an adventurer with a 3-digit rank is much stronger than they are, Luke explains that he knows Dalkin because of his famous history, mentioning that he was about to break into the 2-digit ranks until he committed a crime that made his ranking plummet. Just then, Rosso appears and comments on Dalkin Iris' incredible speed. Dalkin notices the appraiser's presence, though he doesn't recognize her. She, on the other hand, immediately identifies Rosso as the black market merchant ranked at position 776. Realizing this, Dalkin comments that she's well informed for knowing about the crime ranking. He then explains that this ranking has a hierarchy reflecting the severity of a criminal's actions. He gives notable examples like the assassin and thief rankings and adds that higher positions usually indicate an addiction to hard drugs. Dalkin adds that the crime ranking is one of several unofficial rankings created by users themselves since in this world, there are classifications that aren't just made by official institutions. He mentions that high-quality rankings are sometimes compared and even bought by government bodies as long as they don't violate ethics, while others are maintained and updated with the support of enthusiasts. It's then that they spot the unicorn they were looking for. Luke stands in front of Dalkin, blocking him from getting near the royal horn, and questions why he's hanging around with a criminal like Rosso. The adventurer replies without hesitation that he's doing it for money. This shocks Luke, since someone with Dawkins' skill level could easily earn money honestly. However, Dalkin clarifies that money isn't the only thing he wants, stating that there are two reasons for his alliance with Rosso. One is to sell products and the other is to buy them. He then taunts the appraiser, asking if she knows that rankings can be bought. The insinuation makes Luke furious, but Dalkin doesn't seem to care one bit. Annoyed, Owl tries to attack Dalkin with his sword, but the adventurer blocks the strike by catching the blade with just his fingers. Next, Eddie fires an arrow at him, declaring that their mission is to patrol the forest and that someone as dangerous as Dalkin can't be left to run loose. Realizing he'll have to clean up this mess the old-fashioned way, Dalkin gets irritated and starts releasing his purple prana with overwhelming force, causing his muscles to grow. He prepares a devastating punch aimed at the mercenary, who freezes in shock, feeling like he's gonna die from that single blow. It's at that exact moment that Lo reappears to save him. Emanating an immense amount of prana, the protagonist puts his sword in front of the attack and blocks the enemy's punch. The two opponents stare each other down and ask who the other is, but Lo's prana proves to be superior, overpowering Dawkins. The confrontation intensifies into a powerful clash of their magic. With prana radiating from his body, Lo charges at the enemy, forcing him to retreat from his strength. Luke asks if Lo is okay, and he confirms that he is. Then Lo asks if the man in front of him is the illegal hunter, and the appraiser confirms that there's no doubt he was the one hunting the royal horn. With that confirmation, Lo uses a hurricane skill with his green prana, launching the magic at his enemy. However, Dalkin blocks the attack by crossing his arms and surrounding them with his purple energy. He's impressed that a kid like this is using prana, which is so unusual. Lo notices that his attacks barely tickle Dalkin, who proves to be extremely tough. He then remembers a warning from Aldo, who told him to be careful when encountering someone who uses prana. Aldo had explained that Loa was a special case. Normally, you have to be a master in some area, whether with swords or other weapons, to awaken this hidden power through deep study. Lo remembers that according to Aldo, prana is more than just energy. It's an obsession. In other words, if someone is aware of prana, they're probably a master of something specific. He remembers a time he was climbing a mountain with Doug and had a really tough time, but those words encourage him to face his enemy. As he gets ready, Luke warns him that Dalkin Iris is ranked 12th in boxing, 48th in beast taming, 19th in grip strength, and 7th in weightlifting, possessing world-class strength. So she advises him not to get close and to fight from a distance. Annoyed that his stats were revealed like that, Dalkin Iris declares he's going to crush the girl first. He then touches a tree and without much effort rips it right out of the ground using his prana. Holding the trunk with just one arm, he braces himself and hurls the entire tree right at Luke. However, Lo acts fast to save her, slicing the tree in half with his sword, which is glowing with a powerful aura. Luke gets worried, realizing that a defense that intense takes a huge toll on him. Watching the scene, the old man Rosso notices that the boy's prana is very strange. He orders Dalkin Iris to capture him, saying it will make them a lot of money. Dalkin replies that he'll take the kid, assuming he survives the fight. Just then, Eddie fires 2 arrows at the boxer, but the illegal hunter easily blocks them with a prana-wrapped arm, saying the two of them are so weak they're not even worth remembering. Immediately after, Captain Owl throws a bomb. When it hits the ground, it releases a huge cloud of smoke, creating a smokescreen that blocks everyone's view of the fight. Furious, the villain tells them not to mess with him and winds up for a huge punch. He slams his fist into the ground, causing a shockwave that radiates through the forest and destroys everything around it. When the dust settles, Dalkin realizes they all escaped while he was preparing to attack. Rosso scolds him, warning that the move was so dangerous that even Dalkin himself could have been killed by it. Meanwhile, the group had used the smokescreen to escape with the wolf, since they knew they stood no chance against the enemy in a battle of brute strength. Their best bet was to run, since that guy was extremely strong, ranked in the top 600 adventurers, a fact that terrified our protagonist. During the escape, the royal horn slips from his grasp, much to his annoyance. A little later, Luke says they've gone far enough and should be in a safe area, but adds that now they have a lot more work to do. She explains that cruel Raso has to be captured because he's too dangerous. That's when our hero finally realizes that Raso is the man with the beard, and he asks Luke why she wants to capture him. Luke explains that it's a personal goal, which confuses Owl and Eddie. They say they don't know what she's talking about, but they want to decide what to do next. Luke apologizes to Lothuli for getting ahead of herself and reminds them that their official mission is to patrol the Azaban forest, so they need to keep monitoring the two villains. As an official agent, she states that none of them stand a chance in a direct confrontation, and Owl agrees, suggesting they should just observe. Once they can expose the duo's crimes, they'll report it to the department, which will take care of the rest. Although Luke still thinks the plan is dangerous, Owl and Eddie are determined. Currently ranked around 6,000 among adventurers, they want to use this mission to climb the ranks. They plan on using their high stats in stealth and tracking to follow the targets without being detected. They figure that since the forest is 48th on the danger list, the mission could earn them a jump of at least 1,000 spots in the rankings, depending on how reliable the information is. Sensing the risk, Luke asks them not to do anything crazy over this, but Captain Owl reassures her, promising they won't fight since he has no intention of being reckless. The group decides to split up for now. Luke and Lo Tuli will be responsible for taking the royal horn to a safe place since it would be too difficult to fight with the animal nearby. The main concern is that Dalkin Iris is after the cubs, which increases the risk of an ambush. Besides, our hero doesn't want the royal horn getting any more involved in the fight, especially after Luke noticed how terrified it was earlier because of them. The plan they agreed on is that as soon as they get the wolf to safety, they'll meet up under a tall tree. Someone will keep watch all night just to be safe in case they need to help each other out. As they get ready to leave, Eddie continues teaching Lo Tuli how to move through the forest. Aware that Dalkin Iris might escape if they take too long, our hero lets the others go on ahead. But first, he asks Eddie to teach him a bit more about his strategy despite the rush. After a quick training session with the archer, Owl, whose sword was destroyed, borrows a dagger. Our hero then offers his hunting blade as payment for the lesson the mercenary gave him. Before they leave, they advise him to do some mental training before sleeping to increase his success rate, reviewing everything once a day. Now alone, Luke and Lo Tuli focus on getting the royal horn to a safe place while also resuming the ecological survey given by the system. Even though Dalkin Iris is still a concern, they know they have a responsibility to finish the job. In a moment of mutual understanding, our protagonist expresses his confidence that Eddie and Owl will complete their objective, figuring they're even more capable than he is. Luke agrees, stating that their skills are impressive and that they're trustworthy people. Then our protagonist gets an idea and suggests they look for the royal horn's home while they do their survey. He wonders where the animal came from all this time and brings up the possibility that there might be others like it at its home. If the place is safe, they could hide the cub right there. Luke agrees with the idea and says the easiest way to find the place is to simply ask the royal horn. She walks up to it, places her hand on the animal's head, and asks where it wants to go. Immediately, the royal horn starts running down a strange path in the forest, and the two of them follow it. They trust its instincts, knowing it's a smart animal that, despite being scared, was just a cub wanting to go home. During the chase, they come across another unidentified beast. Taking the opportunity, Lo starts documenting the creatures they find, like a green monkey and then a strange-looking moose. He keeps taking notes and sketching the various unknown animals that appear along the way. Eventually, they stop for another rest around a campfire. While our hero is meditating, feeling his prana spread out, Luke calls his name, breaking his concentration. He explained that he was just going over what Eddie had taught him while Luke, still awake, checked the report he'd written. She commented that he wasn't very good at drawing and needed to improve that skill. She also said he needed to be more concise with his writing and approach things from a more objective point of view. Seeing her dedication, our hero asked why she was so determined to capture Raso Cruel and if it was a goal she had to achieve no matter what. The girl confirmed that she had no other choice but to follow through with her plan. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, our hero decided to help her. He understood that her staying up late was a result of extreme anxiety. He knew that if she just stood still, everything she was holding inside would explode. It was a feeling he knew all too well. Luke thought it was strange how naturally he talked about it, but then she realized it was for the same reason he trained late every day. She thanked him for his help even though he still didn't know what her true goal was. Feeling that he could really help the appraiser, he listened intently as Luke finally decided to end the mystery and reveal everything. Luke started by explaining that normal rankings are lists that classify the best people from the top down. On those lists, everyone competes to climb higher and higher to gain honor and prove their worth. She brought up the exact opposite, a ranking that lists people from the bottom up, basically a ranking of the worst, and that dark side of the rankings was exactly what she was hunting. The story began 5 years ago. Luke had a very close friend named Muriella, a girl who was blind from birth and had never seen the world with her own eyes. Maybe that's why she never laughed at Luke's dream. Instead, she'd say her friend was amazing and always ask if she really wanted to be an appraiser. Luke would answer with conviction that her dream was to become the best appraiser and break the record for the #1 spot on the ranking because she believed there was no greater honor than recording the great figures of while the other kids said she would never make it. Muriella was the only one who believed in her dream. One day, Muriella said that school had become too small for someone like Luke. She then told her that her father had invited her on a trip on a cruise ship called Bond Solutions. Luke got super excited since it was a newly built luxury cruise ship. Muriella explained that her father got the invitation from a relative and she didn't know many of the details. She thought about giving her ticket to Luke since the trip wouldn't be as much fun for her because she couldn't see. But Luke flat out refused, saying she would only go if Muriella went with her. She held her friend's hand and promised she would guide her the whole time, so Muriella agreed to ask her father. After their talk, Muriella's mother gave up her ticket and Luke was able to board the Bond Solutions. For Luke, who never fit in at school because her dreams were too big, Muriella was her only friend, and the feeling was mutual for the blind girl. Muriella's family was very grateful to Luke for her friendship. Then, 2 days after they boarded the ship, tragedy struck. An engine problem caused the ship to run aground, and it quickly started sinking. The impact took out more than half the lifeboats, meaning it would take 3 trips to evacuate all the passengers. Facing this critical situation, the captain gathered everyone on deck. With no other choice, he took out a book to decide who would get on the lifeboats. In front of the entire crew, he began reading the list for the first group to be rescued, instructing them to board immediately as soon as their name was called. Luke held Muriella's hand tightly, just as she had promised. Suddenly, the captain called Luke's name. After announcing several other names, he finished the list for the first lifeboat. The girl was in shock when she realized she'd been called alone without Muriella. Her blind friend then let go of her hand and insisted she go on ahead. She said there was no time to argue and that maybe neither of them would survive. Muriella said she believed Luke would become a great appraiser and that Luke needed to believe it too. Luke eventually gave in and got into one of the lifeboats. As soon as she reached the shore, Luke immediately returned to the ship. But when she got back, Muriella was no longer there. By the third and final rescue trip, it was already too late. Luke saw the ship explode and devastated fell to her knees. Nearby, 2 crew members were talking, saying they lived righteous lives and that the people from the ranking of the worst had been left for last. Hearing that, Luke lost it and asked what ranking of the worst meant. Noticing from their reaction that it was something people weren't supposed to know, she demanded an explanation, threatening to tell everyone on the beach if they didn't talk. The 2 crew members decided to tell her on the condition that she wouldn't say anything to the captain. They explained that the ranking of the worst is a list that classifies people by their lowest capability. It groups together those who fall behind in social, economic, physical, or even mental areas. Luke commented that you can identify that kind of person just by looking at them. Our hero then understood that the list was used to decide who would be thrown away when things got tough. People with lives in their hands like ship captains, hospital directors, and politicians frequently used this system to decide which lives had priority. Luke's goal ever since then has been to erase the ranking of the worst from this world because she will never forgive the system that took her best friend. In her view, a ranking that throws people into despair has no place in the world. Our hero, understanding the source of her determination, asked what all of this had to do with Rosso Cruel. Luke explained that she wanted to use one villain to take down another since the ranking of the worst is unofficial, just like the unregistered criminal ranking Rosso Cruel is on. If they could capture him and demand answers about these hidden rankings, they could get closer to whoever is behind it all. That's why she wants to take down Rosso Cruel, no matter the cost. Our hero asked if she had any idea who the mastermind was. Luke replied that given the involvement of politicians and rich people, she believed it was a large organization. Maybe a version of the institute operating in the underworld, but she admitted that was just a guess. Recognizing the burden she had carried alone, he said it must have hurt a lot and that even so, she never stopped. He called her an incredible girl, which made her shy. Then, Luke started to cry and asked Lo Tuli to tell his story too. Still emotional, Luke said she didn't want to cry alone and asked him to share his story as well. Our hero agreed, but told her he'd do it without crying. So around the campfire he started telling her all about his past. The next morning, Lucameldia was still in tears. She never imagined Lo had gone through something so difficult. She finally understood why he was in such a hurry to get to the island of the gods and save his people. Lo, for his part, admitted he'd learned from her that being impatient doesn't guarantee success. Realizing their connection had grown, he told her she could always count on him for anything and officially asked her to be his exclusive appraiser. Through her tears, she accepted, promising he wouldn't regret it, and they sealed the deal with a handshake. After walking for a good while, they started looking for the way back. During a break, our hero asked Luke what kind of areas royal horns usually lived in. She explained that they mostly lived in caves because they were hardy, didn't need to hunt, and preferred to stay quiet in their shelters. Suddenly, the royal horn guiding them seemed agitated by something and took off running. Realizing they were getting close to their objective, they didn't want to lose sight of the creature and ran right after it. The chase led them to a massive rock. Luke immediately noticed it wasn't an ordinary rock, but a Musa mimic, a very rare beast she didn't even know existed in the Azaban forest. However, the creature was already defeated, which explained a lot. She started to explain that while a common mimic lures humans with treasure before devouring them, the Musa mimic uses other beasts as bait. It keeps rare creatures inside its body to attract poachers living in symbiosis with them to devour the hunters together. Because it traveled with so many different kinds of beasts, it was also known as a walking museum. The royal horn must have been trapped inside it. When the Musa mimic feeds, it releases all the beasts from its body at once to attack its prey. But this time, it looked like the mimic fell victim to its own trick. Luke concluded that Dakan Iris was probably the one who defeated the creature, which wrapped up their ecological survey. The mimic's death was the reason so many beasts had suddenly appeared in the forest. All the creatures trapped inside it were released at the same time, throwing the whole ecosystem into chaos. For Luke, this was more than enough information for her report. Our hero thought the scene was horrifying, figuring the wounds on the creature's body were from the poachers. But Luke corrected him, explaining that those marks were made after it died, meaning it had been eaten by other beasts. Since the Musa mimic forms deep bonds with the creatures it lives with, she figured the attacker must have been a beast that was already native to the forest. The royal horn walked up to the giant defeated creature and began to rub against it. Our hero understood its pain, realizing the animal had lost its home just like he had. He knew it felt like having your heart ripped from your chest. The royal horn, as if understanding his feelings, got teary-eyed. Suddenly, a terrible noise made them look back. They saw another bloody orc, the same monster Luke had encountered before. The orc charged, smashing the ground with all its might. But our hero moved fast, scooping up Luke and the royal horn to shield them from the attack. Lo Tuni faced the monster and stepped in front of the two to protect them, while the bloody orc started feeding on the Musa mimic. This confirmed their theory that the beast from the forest was devouring the giant creature. Angered by the scene, the royal horn charged at the orc, leaping to headbutt the huge beast. However, it was easily tossed aside by the monster. Even though it was weak and beaten down, the small animal kept staring down its opponent. Seeing this, Lo Tuni drew his sword from his back, pointed it at the bloody orc, and declared that he would take care of it. He wanted to try using a skill that had failed him many times before. Although Eddie wasn't a swordsmanship expert, he had given him a crucial piece of advice about using prana. Our hero always thought his mistake was in controlling the energy, but he found out it was a simple problem to solve. Eddie taught him the Markman family's method of prana control, passed down from generation to generation, confident that the boy would get the hang of it quickly. Our hero closed his eyes and focused, remembering his master's words. Eddie had told him that he already had a grasp on how to sharpen his senses, and that the next step was to use those senses to look inside himself as if he were watching himself from above. He explained that for someone like Lo Tuni whose prana was overflowing, this technique would work more easily. When our hero opened his eyes, they were green and emanating energy. With his sharpened senses, he looked at himself as if he had an eye outside his body, observing the flow of his own prana. He realized his energy was a mess and used the technique to organize the flow. Next, he took his sword, pointed it at the bloody orc, and unleashed a slash down the middle using the lotus flower technique, followed by an X-shaped cut. Luke was in shock to see the skill finally work. Realizing that a single strike wouldn't be enough, our hero decided to continue the attack, charging up even more power. The lotus flower was a technique that accumulated slashes, so he kept attacking, delivering what seemed like an infinite number of blows. He didn't stop slashing the bloody orc until, at a certain point, he finished the attack and sheathed his sword. He turned away knowing he had defeated the monster, leaving Luke very surprised by his strength. After the battle, our hero approached the royal horn, telling it that it didn't need to be afraid. He confirmed that he wasn't its enemy and held out his hand for the animal to sniff. The wolf sniffed his hand and placed its paw on it in a gesture of trust. Now, Lo Tuni understood that it was better to stay close to the royal horn as the forest had become a very dangerous place. Luke, meanwhile, started to wonder if Owl and Eddie were okay since they were somewhere else. Meanwhile, a poacher stood before another royal horn. He was trying to make a clean cut on the monster, but the animal wouldn't stop moving. So he asked Rosso Cruel if it was okay to damage the carcass a little. Rosso Cruel replied that it would lower the value. He explained that if the material was already in powder form from the start, people would suspect it was fake, even if the plan was to grind it all up later. Watching the scene from a distance, Owl and Eddie realized they couldn't beat that opponent and decided to report it to the evaluation department. Seeing that almost all the merchandise had already been collected by the hunters, they thought about retreating. However, Dalcaniris decided it was time to get rid of the rats spying on him. With that in mind, he charged toward the tree where the two were hiding and threw a powerful punch. The impact destroyed the tree, sending Owl and Eddie flying, but they managed to land on their feet. Even though they were hiding their presence, Dalkin had noticed them from the very beginning. He had been hunting a magical beast on the same path the duo had cleared. While searching for goods, he had tracked all the nearby beasts. This showed that a 3-digit adventurer doesn't just rely on brute force, but is also aware of everything around them. Faced with the threat, Owl threw a smoke bomb, but Dalkin declared that it wouldn't work and caught the artifact in his hand. However, he was caught off guard by an arrow shot by Eddie, which blew up the bomb and released a huge cloud of smoke. Knowing that escaping like before wouldn't work, they started running. Eddie explained that they could only increase their chances of survival even if it was just by a little. Then he took some vital fluid from his own face, wrote something on a piece of paper, and wrapped it around an arrow. He then shot it into the air, stating that they had done everything they could. A moment later, Dalkin emerged from the smoke and asked if they had already given up on running. He called it a smart choice since he knew the terrain perfectly. He claimed he would take them out with a single blow, but Owl challenged him not to underestimate them and got ready to fight. Eddie added that archers show their worth by providing cover and that unlike the fight Isami, they would be able to fight better this time. Owl's specialty was team combat, and with allies, he could perform at his best. Eddie declared that he wouldn't follow weak orders, so they decided to attack together and began to emanate a large amount of prana. From a distance, our hero felt a strange energy and wondered if it was real or just an illusion. Luke then asked Lo Tuli what they should do with the royal horn. He replied that they needed to protect it and take it to the evaluation department later because they couldn't just stand around. To get out of the forest with the animal, they would have to defeat Doc and Iris. Luke agreed and thought of two options. The first was to report to the department and wait for reinforcements. Maybe someone at Luda's level could arrive quickly. Otherwise, assembling a troop would take too long. Our hero considered that Dalkin controlled prana better than he did, and that he wouldn't be able to fool him for long. This led Luke to mention a second, simpler method. Before the plan was revealed, the scene cut back to the fight where Owl and Eddie were still emanating prana, surprising Dalkin. The truth is they didn't know how to use prana before, but as they mastered certain areas of their skills, the energy awakened within them, though they needed a trigger for it to happen. Owl had developed his senses working as a mercenary in group battles, and was an expert at assessing an enemy's strength. He hadn't been in any real trouble for the past few years. Eddie, on the other hand, was born a genius with a bow and arrow. With the support of a prestigious family, no one had ever challenged him. Unfortunately, neither of them knew defeat. But fortunately, they ended up meeting someone who introduced them to that reality, Lo Tuli, a prana user who was in a league of his own. That encounter was more than enough to open their eyes. Now with their prana awakened, they charged at Dalkin. Owl attacked with the dagger he had picked up, but Dalkin blocked the strike and threw his arm down. Next, Owl tried another slash with the dagger he got from Lo, but Dalkin defended using his forearm, which was wrapped in prana. This showed his power, defending without any armor. Eddie could already shoot accurately in the forest, but now he was seeing the colors of prana for the first time. This allowed him to fire a guided arrow with even greater precision, aiming for the back of Dawkins' neck. The hunter dodged and tried to move toward where the arrow came from, but he changed his plan. He activated even more of his prana, causing the projectile to hit the ground instead. Right after that, another smoke bomb exploded on the spot. Despite dodging the slashes, Dalkin gets hit by an arrow right in the stomach. The perfect shot came from the top of a tree where Eddie had positioned himself. Dalkin Iris then realizes he's been tricked, and that the archer climbed the tree the exact moment the fight began. Their coordination was flawless because as soon as the archer shared the positions, the swordsman would press the attack relentlessly. Taking advantage of the distraction, Owl moves in and drives his dagger into the enemy's leg. It's at this moment that Dalkin notices Owl using hand signals, understanding that he's the brains behind their teamwork. He thinks he could figure out the signals if he had time, but he recognizes that the mercenary is a master of bluffs. Faced with their well-executed tactic, Dalkiniris decides to fall back. He starts talking, saying that trafficking demonic beasts is more trouble than it's worth. He claims he was just playing with them the whole time because he didn't want to waste his stamina for nothing. He asks if they understand and taunts them, saying it doesn't matter if they come up with 1,000 strategies because it won't change the huge power gap between them. In response, Owl tells him not to underestimate them. And right after that, Eddie fires another arrow. Sensing the danger, Dalkin Iris now focuses completely on the fight and manages to block both attacks. He reveals his true strength, using his number 48 rank in domination to overpower Owl and easily catch his dagger. Then, he simply shatters the weapon with his bare hands, showing off his 19th rank in grip strength. Right after, Dalkin lands an extremely powerful kick on Owl, who is sent flying backward with so much force that he breaks a tree when he slams into it. Feeling excruciating pain, Owl falls to the ground, leaving Eddie visibly worried. At that moment, Dalkin Iris rips an entire tree out of the ground and hurls it, proving he's 7th in the weight-lifting rank. The impact leaves Owl completely broken on the ground, weakly calling out for Eddie. Dalkin approaches and comments that with his organs destroyed, he won't even be able to sell the mercenary's body, so he decides to just finish him off right there. At the exact moment of the final blow, however, a green prana slash appears out of nowhere. It hits Dalkin's arm and stops him from continuing. The hero had arrived just in time, thanks to the warning sent by Eddie's arrow. Lying on the ground, Owl tries to say something, but he can't finish the sentence. The hero appears on the scene saying his method is pretty simple. As he draws his sword, he states with conviction that he is going to eliminate the villain. And so, the adventurer ranked number 2700 prepares to fight Dalkin Iris, who is ranked number 672. From a distance, Rosso Cruel realizes Dalkin Iris is taking longer than he expected. Even though he doubted Dalkin was losing to such weak adventurers, he considered the unknown variable of the hero, Lo Tully, noticing that the rising prana belonged to that very boy. On the battlefield, the hero steps up to face Dalkin Iris. The two stand face to face, radiating huge amounts of energy. The tension breaks when Dalkin takes the first step and throws a powerful punch. He follows up with a series of strikes that the hero skillfully defends with his sword. Next, Lo climbs a tree and with a quick movement unleashes a spinning slash. But Dalkin Iris manages to block the first strike. Seeing this, the hero leaps from the tree and charges straight ahead at high speed, and his enemy does the same. When their attacks collide, a huge amount of prana is released, causing the environment to start distorting. Neither of them manages to land a hit. Dalkin Iris comments that Lo's movements have improved, but he adds with a sneer that it's only by a little and that he's still no match for his strength. Then the enemy leaps and unleashes even more energy. His aura charges forward like a bull, slamming into the hero. Even so, Lo Thuli stays on his feet and doesn't fall. Dalkin Iris charges with another powered-up punch, hitting a tree and then ripping it from the ground to use as a weapon, shouting that there's no chance of winning by running away. The hero ducks and dodges the tree that almost crushed him, while the illegal hunter jumps again, preparing another brutal blow. Lo remembers that Dalkin Iris is number 672 in the rankings, but he has already faced stronger opponents like number 11 and even Adal, number 1. As he sees the attack coming, he feels no fear and unleashes his prana to its absolute limit. The energy is so intense that it becomes visible to the naked eye and temporarily blinds the enemy, who stops his attack. Seizing the opportunity, Lothuli prepares a massive strike and lands a deep cut, severely wounding Dalkin. Annoyed, Dalkin Iris says it was a cheap trick and that the hero just copied the technique. Lo replies that his enemy doesn't even have a technique, and Dalkin charges forward with another punch. At that moment, the hero understands that he doesn't need to face brute force head-on. He just needs to use strategy. He remembers what Owl taught him about tactics. In a world where knowledge and patterns make all the difference, the key is to secure a numerical advantage. That's why Owl taught him simple patterns. The first step was a surprise attack. The second was to lure the enemy, and the third part was a coordinated attack. Exactly at that moment, following the plan, Owl jumps from a tree. Taking advantage of the opening, the mercenary lunges at Dalkin, who is furious because he didn't expect Owl could still move. Owl latches onto the enemy's body, immobilizing him to help the hero. As Lo charges toward them, Dalkin becomes furious and curses them both, releasing an absurd amount of prana that throws them back and destroys part of the environment. As Dalkin prepares a final blow, a homing arrow appears aiming for his eye. It was Eddie's last attack. The arrow pierces Dalkin Iris's eye, causing deep damage. Even though he was badly injured, Eddie managed to fire that last shot, trusting Lothuli with the rest. Without hesitating, the hero charges forward and delivers the final blow. It's a brutal prana-coated slash that tears a deep wound across his enemy's stomach. Even though he's wounded, Dalkin stumbles back but manages to stay on his feet. Suddenly, he lets out an incredibly loud scream. Gathering his last bit of strength, his arm grows and slams into the ground, sending our hero flying high into the air. Lo manages to block the blow with his sword, but the impact is still devastating. While the hero is in the air, Dalkin Iris yells that he'll crush him the moment he touches the ground. He says Lo deserves praise for lasting this long, but warns him that this time, there are no friends to save him. He tells him to stop being a nuisance and just die already. At that moment, the hero remembers when he calmed the horned wolf, holding its paw and telling it he wasn't its enemy. It's at this exact moment that Luke appears, shouting for Dalkin Iris to stop and getting his attention. Taking advantage of the distraction, the horned wolf charges forward and lands a powerful blow, driving its horn into Dawkins' back. Immediately, Luke yells for Lothuli to end this once and for all. Answering the call, our hero descends from the sky like a lightning bolt, shrouded in green prana and letting out an aggressive roar. His first strike hits the enemy, who tries to defend with his forearm, but the cuts don't stop and keep piling up. The blows get heavier and heavier, driving Dalkin into the ground under the immense pressure. To finish it, the hero uses the lotus flower technique at the highest intensity he's ever reached. He finally defeats the illegal hunter by slamming him into the ground and creating a small crater. After the attack, Lo collapses from exhaustion, leaning on his sword for support after using so much energy. Luke notices that he's not okay and that his injuries are serious, but she still congratulates him, saying he was incredible for defeating Dalkin Iris. However, the protagonist replies that he only knocked him out. He says that although Dalkin won't be getting up anytime soon, the enemy is still alive, his face completely disfigured. Suddenly, Dalkin grabs Lothulli's face, saying he's going to kill him and send him to hell. Luke yells for him to let go, but at that moment, she feels a strange and bizarre energy coming from him and falls to the ground, realizing that Dalkin is like a monster. Despite the threat, Dalkin Iris can't crush Lo's head. Lo, in turn, grips his sword, ready to continue the fight. In this tense moment, the villain has a flashback. He remembers his old friends commenting on how he had a lot of energy, but that to climb the ranks from now on, they would need to work as a team. They explained that Dalkin would have to respect their pace too, which seemed to deeply irritate him since he considered himself much stronger. Back in the present, he looks at Lo and Luke, saying they're both pathetic. Then he grabs our protagonist's neck, declaring that he's going to strangle him to death. The hero is caught in the chokehold and at first can't react. Even so, he tells himself that he can't die in a place like this as he grips his enemy's hand. Then he remembers his sister Yuna and refuses to die. Several memories from his life flash through his mind and he begins to emanate an absurd amount prana, a level so high that it startles his enemy. A gentle breeze and scattered clouds draw out the water and caress the earth. Those who consume life in a sunlit and inviolable sanctuary glimpse eternity. Therefore, the invader must witness with his own eyes these precious days that will never crumble. At that exact moment, Lo grabs Dawkins' arms and rips them from his body with surprising strength. Completely in shock, Dalkin asks what the protagonist did. To everyone's surprise, our hero used the arts of the Thule tribe. It was Lo's technique known as the Descent of the Celestial Spirit. This powerful enchantment left the onlookers confused as it was so different from other techniques. Emanating an immense amount of prana, Lo spoke the words of the enchantment and with a quick move ripped off one of his enemy's arms, who reacted with fury. Dalkin tried to retaliate with a brutal punch using his left arm, but the instant he touched Lo's chest, he lost his other arm too. Lo declared Dawkins' defeat and then delivered a fatal slash to the illegal hunter's chest, eliminating him once and for all. As the enemy fell, the protagonist thought to himself that the rankings were a horrible thing. This situation made Dalkin remember the past when he was told that he needed team performance to climb the adventurer rankings. Even though he had completed missions alone and reached rank 5,800, the final judgment was that he lacked team spirit. Annoyed, Dalkin Iris slammed his hand on the director's desk, demanding to be judged only on his individual performance. After all, he was much stronger than most double-digit rankers. The evaluator, however, explained that the rankings and their criteria couldn't be changed and that as a member of the evaluation department, he couldn't promote him. He mentioned that there were exceptions and special cases for certain rankings, like the kid who had just become number 2 being an expert at playing solo. However, the evaluator made it clear that Dalkin Iris didn't fit into any of those exceptions. If it were today, Dalkin would have beaten the evaluator to death. He was very angry because although it didn't seem like it, he worked really hard. For a ranker, their rank is their ultimate dream, and it's no exaggeration to say they live to climb higher. With no choice, he ended up meeting Ryu from rank 4,600 and a girl from rank 5,000. They both knew Dalkin was in a hurry, but they considered it an honor to be on a team with a 3-digit ranker. So he had to form a team with those he considered small fry. The real reason for his lack of team spirit was his overwhelming superiority. No matter who he teamed up with, his companions always got in his way, a factor the evaluation department completely ignored. One day, they encountered a griffin. And while the other two were in shock, Dalkin defeated the creature with a single punch without even breaking a sweat, ending the mission instantly. He noticed that since joining the small fry, the encounters with magical beasts had increased. And although it wasn't hard to defeat them, he was surprised by the frequency. One night, he saw his 2 companions sneaking through the forest and discovered the truth. They were stealing a bunch of luxury items. The pair would research in advance where large beasts appeared. And during the adventure, they would secretly lure the monsters using a high-level ranker like him to take care of the threat. They were talking to each other about how they looked for rankers who didn't understand how the world worked so they could use them as much as they wanted to get what they desired. Seeing that trash, Dalkin ordered them to drop the bag. In a cowardly move, the boy punched the girl in the face, planning to blame Dalkin so he would lose his rank. The traitor then shouted, asking how Dalkin could dare to hit his own companions and claiming that this was the reason he couldn't climb the ranks. He threatened to report the incident to the evaluation department. He knew that no matter how much Dalkin defended himself, their word would be worth more since he was seen as a ranker with no team spirit while they were considered generous. To top it all off, they said that if Dalkin apologized, they would pretend nothing happened. The idea of having to obey that trash just to climb the ranks made Dalkin so furious that he couldn't control his anger and eliminated them both right then and there. He never regretted that decision. However, the evaluation department didn't take long to find out what he had done. Murdering another adventurer is considered a very serious crime. However, Dawkins' past achievements were taken into account and he wasn't arrested. Instead, his rank was revoked and he was banned from registering again for 3 years. Selling everything he had in a fit of rage was the trigger for his downfall. By the time the waiting period was over and he could register again, Dalkin had already given up on everything, trying to make money any way he could and just living recklessly. It was right around then that a shady dealer made him a strange offer. Rosso Cruel gave him the idea of buying a rank. Driven by revenge at the time, Dalkin ended up accepting the offer. He desperately wanted to destroy the ranking system and make the evaluation department, which hadn't recognized him, regret its decision. He knew that one day, our hero would also experience that same feeling, the hopeless pain of a ranker who had hit his limit. After this tough battle, our hero came out victorious. Right after the fight, the girl asked where the protagonist was going. Even though he was exhausted, he replied that the mission wasn't over yet because they needed to capture Rosso Cruel. Only then could she get closer to discovering who controls the ranking of the worst. Extremely motivated to help her, he was getting ready to leave, but the girl ran up and hugged him from behind, insisting that he shouldn't do it now. She argued that in his current state, even she could defeat him, and told him to wait for the next opportunity. Our protagonist tried to argue, but she said that just finding a ranker willing to go so far for her was enough for now. Overcome by exhaustion, he apologized and collapsed on the ground unconscious. The girl was the first to wake up and rushed to report what happened to the evaluation department. Later, when he woke up, he helped with first aid even though he was injured. He believed that as long as he could move, it was worth using his power. While he slept, the protagonist had a very long dream where he saw his parents back when he was just a baby. His father said that things were imprinted on one's prana and heart, and that when he awakened in the future, he would gradually remember conversations like that one. That's why his mother avoided saying strange things, figuring Lewis might remember. They created the identity of Tony and lived in hiding so they could have peace away from others. In the dream, the protagonist felt the same way his father did in the past. However, if what he said was true, he wondered why his father had taught him how to use prana. He then understood that his mother, his father, his grandmother, and everyone else knew that one day he would have to fight. At that moment, he started to wake up from the dream. When he opened his eyes, he saw the 11th ranked adventurer there. Luke explained that she was very worried because he had slept for a whole day, and he was happy that she had taken care of him. Lot also showed up, saying he had come by while he was sleeping, and that if he hadn't woken up, he would have taken him to the royal castle. They told him that the story of the mess he got into right on his debut had already spread. Our hero managed to get up and move around. Owl asked if Ed had gone to the evaluation department just to come right back, and Eddie replied that he couldn't let them down. Lo Tuli would be happy to know that everyone was safe and that he had helped them. Noticing that Doc and Iris could also move, Laud released his restraints, warning him that it would be a waste of time if he tried anything funny. Then, the members of the department started to take him away. As Dalkin was being escorted away, Laud wondered how he had lost his 2 arms. They didn't look like they had been cut off, but rather erased from existence. Laud had never seen anything like it before. He knew that to cause that kind of damage, even the number 1 ranked knight wouldn't escape unharmed. He started to think that Lo Tuli must have an ace up his sleeve. Meanwhile, Luke suggested that as soon as our hero's wounds healed, he should register for more rankings. She explained that rankings help with self-analysis. She used Dalkin as an example, who preferred close-quarters combat because he knew no one could beat him in brute strength. Therefore, registering for various rankings would help him better understand his own strengths. Luke added that the evaluation department had facilities that could measure all kinds of abilities, and she would show him everything once they reached the royal castle. Far away, in the deep dark parts of the forest, Rosso felt one last strange ripple of prana. He reflected that the boy, after hiding for all those years, had appeared as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Rosso wondered if maybe he was drawing attention on purpose in an attempt to make contact with the island of the gods. Soon after, he arrived before a double door adorned with a design of 2 snakes. Upon entering the place, hooded men were already waiting for him. They greeted him as their leader, announcing that they had finally found the descendant of Babel. With this discovery, the hooded men believed they could make great progress with their plans. They declared that the time had come to free the world from the useless shackles of the rankings. The leader then ordered his companions to unleash their power without hesitation, all in the name of Ouroboros, their secret organization. It was revealed that Cruel Rosso was number 76 in the smuggler rankings. However, he was also Adam, the number 1 in the smuggler rankings, 2nd in the assassin rankings, 4th in the theft rankings, and 1st in the drug manufacturing rankings. In addition, Adam was number 1 in the Prana Scholar rankings and the leader of Ouroboros, the number 1 criminal organization. In the end, it became clear that Cruel Rosso and Adam were the same person. Finally, the group arrived at the royal castle. Luke acted quickly, sending Owl and Ed straight to the infirmary while she handled the report. She also asked Laud to handle the report on Dawkins' beast kidnapping. Our hero noticed she was giving orders like a true professional, to which the girl replied that she was already used to the messes rankers tended to make. She also asked Laud and the other 3 to clear their schedules for 10 days from now as they would be updating their rankings. Hearing this, Owl and Ed were extremely happy, expecting good results. While they were recovering, Luke wanted to talk to the protagonist about the royal horn. She explained that when the evaluation department takes a magical beast under its protection, it needs to assign a guardian. If possible, she wanted him to be the one. He didn't mind, but he asked why she didn't just take care of the beast herself. Luke clarified that the evaluation department had a lot of bureaucratic restrictions. And since the royal horn was going to grow very large, the department's facilities would become too cramped. As an evaluator, she wouldn't be able to take it for walks. But our hero, as an adventurer, could take it outside whenever he wanted, which would be great for the wolf. Grateful, she asked him to give the beast a name. Our hero decided to name him Ralph. When Luke asked if there was a story behind the name, he said that when he was little, a very brave man in his village faced a red grizzly bear all by himself, so he borrowed his name. Then he thanked Luke for saving him during the fight with Dalkin and asked Ralph to take good care of her from now on. He then petted the wolf's head, which responded with an affectionate gesture. With Ralph now under the protection of the evaluation department, the protagonist could visit him whenever he wanted. After that, he went to the infirmary where Owl Darkus and Eddie were already recovering. He felt his ranking had started to climb and wondered what position he would end up in. He felt busy and was finally understanding how other rankers felt. Suddenly, Nurse entered the room and asked everyone to be quiet, promising that if they obeyed, she would heal any wound in 10 days. The condition for being healed, however, was to follow her instructions to the letter. The doctor in question was Clara Save, ranked 14th, who immediately told our hero to lie down. She scolded him, saying that ranked adventurers were idiots for walking around with open wounds. This started a little competition between them to see who would heal first, which made Clara extremely irritated, and she told them all to shut up. Suddenly, the bandages on their bodies seemed to take on a life of their own, wrapping around them tightly. Clara Save's healing ability was undeniable, and in an instant, everyone was completely recovered. During the recovery period, Luke visited them a few times, but she seemed very busy, probably swamped with work. The evaluation department was known for being the most rigorous and impartial institution in the world, and it was clear that Luke was working incredibly hard. In a scene in her office, she commented to her secretary that the evaluations were complicated and required some tough decisions. She then asked her to contact a Prana scholar named Layla because no matter how much they searched, they couldn't find any information on a tribe called Thule. 10 days later, everyone gathered in front of Luke for their ranking update. She explained that to update a complex ranking like an adventurer's, they had to rent an entire room to process a mountain of data. This involved cross-referencing information with every other type of ranking. Normally, several people worked on this, but to everyone's amazement, she revealed that she did almost all of it herself with a friend only helping for a short time. They were in shock since the adventurer ranking was famous for its complicated process. The fact that she had updated all 3 of them on her own proved just how competent she was as an evaluator. Luke simply said that it was her job and got straight to the point, starting the update. First up was Al Darkus, who was ranked at 6,300. She pointed out that during the forest patrol, he had cornered Dalkin, a violator of the ranker's law, demonstrating exceptional cunning and strategy. His strategic thinking, even with a makeshift team, and his leadership were decisive. Considering all of this, Owl Darkus' new adventurer rank was announced as 2,067, an impressive climb of over 4,000 positions. Next was Eddie Markman's turn, who was ranked at 6,700. Luke praised his great performance during the Azaban Forest Patrol, highlighting his mental fortitude to shoot with deadly accuracy in any situation. Additionally, his proficiency and prana control was so great that he could even teach others, and his sharp senses in forest environments were perfect for the life of an adventurer. Taking all of this into account, Eddie's new rank jumped to 1,870, a climb of almost 5,000 positions. Finally, it was Lo Tully's turn, who held the rank of 2,728. Luke listed his achievements. He discovered 7 unconfirmed species of magic beasts, identified the cause of the mass appearance of the beasts, and his swordsmanship was able to rival Dawkins' strength. She also mentioned his high potential for absorbing new techniques and, above all, the mysterious technique he used to eliminate his enemy. Considering all these factors, he climbed to rank 1,089. With that jump, he almost reached the triple digits in one go. Luke warned him to be prepared as this speed of growth was unprecedented. She explained that the moment a ranker truly gets attention isn't when they first enter the rankings, but when they climb significantly. This is because it represents their growth rate. While Owl and Eddie's climb from the 6,000s to the 2,000s was incredible, Lo's jump from the 2,000s to nearly the triple digits was considered exceptional. At that very moment, people all over the world had just learned the name Lo Thule. From that day on, he would go through several changes as a ranker, for better and for worse, because of the recognition he had gained. With that, she concluded the update, mentioning that, as expected of the Masis Knight Order, the young men had grown a lot. Meanwhile, someone borrowed a ranking panel to check the standings. She looked at the adventurer ranking and noticed a certain ranker had climbed so high, he almost broke into the triple digits in a single evaluation even though he'd stolen a swordsmanship style. Realizing this, the girl got furious, but she quickly apologized for the damage she'd done, admitting she got a little carried away because of that boy. Lo then found out there was a place like that in the evaluation department. They arrived at a giant facility that was the department's pride and joy, a place known as the challenge room. Inside, some people were studying intensely while others were hitting punching bags with all their strength. Luke took this chance to remind him of something she'd said before, that it was a good idea for Lo to register for multiple rankings. She explained that in the challenge room, it was possible to measure a ranker's various skills and find out their position on the spot. Since it was an extremely valuable facility, only found attached to the major evaluation departments in each country's capital, it made updating simple rankings very easy. Lo understood that there were easy-to-update rankings like the search ranking he updated with the rank cell the other day and more complex ones like the adventure ranking, which required a visit to the department. Luke continued, clarifying that the easy-to-update rankings had tougher competition and could be used as a stepping stone to climb the main ranking. Lo Thuli was a surprisingly quick thinker, and he understood everything after just one explanation. Luke noticed he wasn't just smart but was always thinking about the shortest path to get to the island of the gods. Excited, she announced she would analyze his skills all day and told him to give it his all since getting high ranks there would help boost his adventurer ranking. She confirmed that he could obviously use prana as it was also considered a skill. Lo's body immediately began to radiate energy as he started the tests. In the short distance run ranking, he reached position 871. Next, in the power and jump rankings he placed at 1000. While in grip strength and weight lifting, he hit positions 2000 and 1800, respectively. His results continued with position 934 in reflexes and 809 in balance. After getting the 2500 spot in lung capacity, he used prana to sharpen his five senses, which led to some impressive scores. Position 104 in hearing and 98 in smell. Finally, Luke announced they had finished everything related to physical skills and would now move on to the resistance rankings, which took longer. As Lo walked by, several people praised him, recognizing him as the adventurer who had jumped into the thousands all at once. He noticed he was drawing too much attention for getting such high ranks, but Luke warned him to get used to those stares, given his ultimate goal in life. From a distance, the white-haired, red-eyed girl from before was watching him strangely. Luke commented that Lo's sensory rankings were very high, and he explained it was because he learned to use prana on his senses with Ed. She agreed, mentioning that there was also a natural talent for prana and that for someone like him, sharpening his senses, seeing far, and moving fast came naturally. She compared him to a wild animal, but she figured his muscular strength didn't seem to have much room to grow. Considering his high ranks in the short sprint and reflexes, Luke concluded that he should focus on agility. "That's a tough call, but a wise one," said Director Grant, who appeared out of nowhere. He greeted Luke, happy to see her after a long time. Luke explained to Lo that the director was a very important person, and the two of them immediately bowed their heads in respect. The director, for his part, joked that good manners didn't earn you any points in the adventurer rankings. Lo felt like he'd heard that phrase somewhere before, and soon the explanation about the man came to him. Gran was the director of the Trishista branch of the evaluation department, an organization that got rid of hierarchies to keep things fair, making most positions equal. However, Mr. Gran was a rare exception. He was an amazing person and a famous talent scout in the city, responsible for overseeing incredible number of top rankers. That's when Lo remembered hearing the same phrase from Laud, realizing Gran was also the one who updated his rank to its current position. Gran humbly said he wasn't such a great evaluator and that, in fact, he was the one responsible for Dalcaniris. That's why he came personally to apologize and express his gratitude. He praised Lo Tully, ranked 1000th as a new generation ranker who had achieved incredible feats, and thanked him for stopping Dalkin. Gran then informed him that the investigation into why Dalkin fell was complete, revealing that the members of the party he formed had tried to set him up. It turns out the duo was constantly throwing extravagant parties that were inappropriate for their rank, which had already caught the attention of the evaluation department. The two criminals were already under surveillance long before Dalkin Iris got his hands dirty. That's how the evaluators discovered the plan through one of the duo's friends who they expected Dalkin to trust. Gran confessed that evaluators stake their pride on assessing rankers and that fake reports don't get past them, adding that he deeply regretted approving Dalkin Iris. Lo, however, spoke up, saying it wasn't Grant's fault. He argued that rankers can think for themselves and that the department is just a source of support. They don't need to be taught every little thing. After all, rankers have their own pride, and Dalkin Iris must have been following his own pride when he made those mistakes. The director then mentioned he was going to Dalkin's cell to talk with him. Grant explained that the illegal hunter was angry to see him, but he didn't deny his responsibility. When Gran asked why Dalkin hadn't fled, the answer was a ranker's pride. It's a pride that makes you step forward when you show respect to an opponent. Lo Tuli was the one who made him remember that pride, and that's why the director expressed his gratitude once more. After their conversation, the director said he would leave right after them. Luke then announced they were going to try and update a few more. When Lo asked which ones, she replied that since he uses a sword, they'd try the swordsmanship ranking. Also, out of personal curiosity, she wanted to try the prana ranking too. Director Gran, however, warned that it would be difficult to measure prana in that location. He explained the country was relatively advanced in technology, but it was lacking when it came to prana. Grant stated that with the equipment they had, they wouldn't be able to measure Lo's prana. He advised Luke to be prepared if she planned on continuing as his exclusive evaluator. Then the director left, leaving Lo and Luke confused by his words. Not knowing what he meant, they walked over to a prana measuring machine. Luke explained that there are prana-related rankings, but after Gran's warning, she decided to focus on the sword rankings for now. She explained that the sword is a popular weapon with many different rankings, like one for speed. However, before they started, Luke asked Lo for a very important favor. She told him not to use the sword saint style because it was a special style passed down from a master to a single disciple inherited by the number 1 ranked knight. For every other ranker, the sword saint style was a dream and a goal. And it was no exaggeration to say that most of them were trying to inherit that style. That's when Lo finally understood the true magnitude of the technique Adel had taught him. Luke explained that even though Lo Tully was throwing slashes around like it was nothing, it was actually a very advanced technique. She believed that only swordsmen ranked 800 or higher were capable of such a feat, which meant that out of 2 billion people, only 800 could do what he did. She went on to explain that the founder of the Sword Saint style was the first number 1 knight, Lawrence Wolfraven, a first-class swordsman and also a scholar who created many sword styles. The Sword Saint style was considered his masterpiece, a technique that allowed him to manipulate slashes freely and earned him the nickname of the Slash Master. Realizing the power Lo used had immense value and historical weight, Luke thought it was best for him to keep it under wraps for now. After all, if the high-ranking knights started hating him now, it would be terrible for his future. Agreeing to be careful, our hero decided to take on the sword rankings without using that style. Even though he couldn't use his full strength, he figured it was still better to be registered in the rankings. He even asked if it would be better not to register at all than to get a low rank. But Luke insisted he wouldn't have any credibility if he wasn't registered in several rankings, and that he didn't need to worry about where he placed. The first test was for consecutive slashes performed on a special rock called a possession stone. It was extremely resistant to slashes, and the goal was to hit it repeatedly within a time limit. The slashes were counted by a sensor, and the stone healed itself. Lo thought using the lotus technique would get a good result. However, he held back and threw several slashes without using prana, reaching position 149. Next, he moved on to the slash precision test, which was measured by the gap between 2 iron plates. If the plates moved even 1 millimeter, the test was over. The difficulty increased as the gap got narrower and narrower, and if the slash speed was too low, it wouldn't be counted. They saw a samurai attempting the test and reaching position 734, commenting that true masters were rare and that anyone who called themselves a swordsman should at least be in the triple digits. Right after that, our hero performed his precise slash and ranked at 87. He thought that now that he could use Lotus, he should start practicing the third technique. Even without using the Sword Saint style, he was already among the best in the rankings. Convinced her instincts were right, Luke asked if Lo Thuli had his ranking card, the one he used when he entered the Azaban forest. Our hero then took out his registration card, and she explained that he could put up to 10 of his ranks on it. They decided to register his highest ranks, and she got ready to put in the request. At that moment, a woman with white hair and red eyes appeared asking about our hero's rank. Then she stood in front of the stone, drew her sword from its sheath for a split second, and unleashed several slashes reaching position 29. The woman then turned to Lo saying she knew he could do that if he wanted to since he was a user of the Sword Saint style. Luke was shocked that he'd been found out so easily. Without hesitating, the woman challenged Lo Tully to a fight. If she won, he would have to give up his sword forever. She said they should go somewhere else because knights were watching them. Our hero followed her to an outdoor area of the castle where she revealed that the leak of the Sword Saint style was a tremendous humiliation for her and that she didn't want to see anyone like him using that style. Showing a bit of courtesy, she introduced herself as Setsu Aurelia, Ranker Knight 305, and said he should understand her pride as a knight. Luke, still confused, asked how she found out that Lo used the Sword Saint style. Setsu replied that he used the technique right out in the open during the adventure registration test and that anyone could have noticed. It turns out one of her seniors, who was also a Ranker Knight, took the same test and noticed the technique. As soon as she heard her senior's explanation, she knew that Lo had stolen the style. Lo tried to say he didn't steal it, but she wouldn't listen since she couldn't imagine that Adel himself had taught him. To her, it was absurd to believe there was any chance a classless person like him had a connection to Lord Adel. Setsu continued, saying she was the one who was supposed to inherit the Sword Saint style directly from Lord Adel because he himself had promised it to her one day. She accused Lo of just seeing the style in some record book, copying it, and now going around using a fake title, which was a huge pain for the Ranker Knights. However, she offered him a way out, saying that if he apologized and promised to never use this fake style again, she'd forgive him. In response, our hero replied that Lord Adel himself had taught him the technique. He then declared himself Adel's disciple, leaving the girl completely stunned. Furious, she drew her sword declaring that some lies just make it impossible to hold back your anger. To Setsu, his words had stained her very soul and insulted her deep admiration for her master. She declared that Lo Tully deserved to be cut down. And so the rank 305 knight challenged our protagonist. Without wasting any time, she charged at him, powering up an attack and unleashing a high-speed slash, which Lo managed to block with his own blade. As he blocked her attack, he felt her overwhelming presence and realized that if he just stayed on the defensive, he would definitely lose. Determined to counterattack, he prepared a slash using his prana, which began to surge with incredible power. Seeing this, she also expanded her prana to an insane level and decided to unleash a slash of her own. Both of them used the Gale slash technique and their attacks clashed. Even though it was the same technique, her version was clearly faster than our protagonist's. When their attacks finally dissipated, he was left with a small cut on his face. Seeing that he needed more, he decided to use the lotus technique. Immediately, Setsu decided to show him a real technique too, countering with the lotus flower. The two attacks clashed again, and our hero yelled out, trying to put more force behind the impact. An incredible sight formed where they clashed. A large lotus flower made from both of their pranas bloomed, marking the battle between two users of the Sword Saint style. Lo found that strange because the style is passed from the master to a single disciple. If he learned from the master, it didn't make sense that Setsu Aurelia also knew how to use the technique. He noticed that while her form was a bit rough, she more than made up for it with her pure skill with a sword. While our protagonist continued to block her attacks, Setsu wondered if what he said was actually true, but she preferred to believe Lord Adel's word. She then taunted him. She reminded him that she'd already beaten him with the Gale Slash and the Lotus Bloom and asked if he was going to use Furious Rupture next. Our hero, however, admitted that he didn't know how to use that third technique. She couldn't believe he only knew two of the style's techniques and still had the nerve to call himself a disciple. Lo knew that at 17 years old, the same age as her, his rank was far lower in almost every way. With his current rank and power, he couldn't beat her with his sword alone. Realizing this, he started to release a huge amount of prana to use another power. He then began to recite the words of his gentle breeze and scattered cloud spell, leaving Setsu in shock to see a rookie ranker like him using incantations. To her, his growth rate in the rankings was unnaturally fast, and it was frustrating. Determined to take him down in a single strike, she made her move. Setsu believed that whatever skill he had would be useless against her speed. She wanted to defend the honor of the knight at all right then and there. She began to prepare her own spell, aware that incantations were a special power that only the chosen could wield. If he could really use that, it meant he was incredibly strong. The instant our hero opened his eyes, his prana flaring as he finished the spell's final words, she attacked with a gale slash to stop him. The attack shot towards him like a tornado, but it passed right through him. He had activated a physical-type divine art to reach the celestial spirit. He was completely unharmed by the attack, leaving Setsu in shock as she wondered if it was some kind of defensive skill. Even though the prana around his body seemed like impenetrable armor, Setsu had a weird feeling about his attack. Her instincts warned her not to advance. In the blink of an eye, our hero rushed at her. He held his sword with both hands and unleashed a slash that she managed to dodge even though his movements hadn't changed. Determined to end this before he pulled something even crazier out of his hat, she prepared to use her third technique, the Furious Rupture. However, before she could even attack, our hero already had his own strike ready. She was shocked to realize he wasn't even going to try and block her attack, knowing there was no way he could withstand a blow like that. Then he unleashed his existence-erasing aura and slashed at the girl. Terrified, she watched as he stopped the sword right above her head, deactivating the enchantment and his prana, as he declared that he had won the duel. Right after that, Luke declared him the winner. The girl fell to her knees in shock, unable to believe she had lost. Immediately afterward, our protagonist collapsed on the ground, completely exhausted. He said he was fine, but his body wouldn't move, revealing that the enchantment had a very heavy cost even though it only lasted for 5 seconds. Hearing this, Setsu wondered if he had also collapsed in the fight against Dalkaniris because of the enchantments and not his injuries. The girl then burst into tears, telling Lord Adel that she had lost the fight and asking why he gave the sword saint style to a man like that. Luke approached and asked if she could call her Setsu. Luke politely explained that while Ranker Knights idolized the sword saint style, Setsu might have been too rash for attacking someone like that out of the blue. Curious, Luke asked if she had a special reason for being so obsessed with the saint style. The girl confirmed that she did, as she considered herself the only disciple recognized by Lord Adel. She explained that back when her ranking was completely stagnant, he appeared and secretly taught her swordsmanship just one time. At that moment, she was sure that Lord Adel wanted to pass the sword saint style on to her. Luke was shocked, and Setsu Aurelia explained that Adel is famous for never taking on disciples, which made her think she was the only exception. She believed that her talent had been recognized by him, and that Lord Adel was waiting for her. Motivated by this possibility, she worked really hard, defeating more and more monsters and even kept a picture of him in her pendant. Luke then realized she had been led on and became unbearable because of a doll. When Lo Tully finally got up, even with his body feeling heavy, he stated again that he wasn't lying about the night. He told the truth about becoming Adal's disciple and learning everything about the sword saint style directly from him. The girl admitted that it was impossible not to recognize Lord Adal's sword, and that his style was the real deal unlike hers, which she only learned by watching from a distance. She thought she had something different, that it wasn't the real style, but a technique she had copied perfectly just by watching, which was an incredible feat. It was Setsu Aurelia who proposed they bet their swords. She said that if he told her to give up her sword, she would stop being a knight that very day. Luke intervened, saying she didn't have to go that far. Setsu Aurelia agreed that anything else would do, and that he had the right to demand whatever he wanted, promising to accept. Our hero got a little shy, thinking about what to ask for. After thinking for a long time, he said he had decided, but she interrupted him, warning him not to make any weird requests about touching her body. He replied that he had no reason to want something like that, which made her a little upset. Finally, he revealed that he had 2 requests for the girl. The first was for her to help him raise his adventurer rank. The second was for her to teach him the sword saint style. Setsu Aurelia was confused, arguing that he should know the style better than she did. He argued back, saying he only knew how to use 2 techniques and that his skills were still weak. In turn, he thought it was incredible that she had managed to copy the style to that level just by watching. The girl replied that even if it was an imitation, performing the revered Adel's techniques poorly would bring shame to his name. She stated that even a loser has their pride and asked to borrow his rank cell for a moment. She intended to check some night missions that could help him rank up. Our hero then asked the evaluator if he could take on night rank missions. Luke explained that normally, they can't accept missions exclusive to a specific ranker class, but the rules allowed it if he was accompanied by a guardian of that class. The hero figured that taking on night missions wasn't the fastest way to raise his adventurer rank. Luke agreed, but explained that he needed to expand his skills and cover his weaknesses to truly progress. He added that factors like knowledge, negotiation skills, and teamwork were also crucial, and that focusing only on adventure missions would limit his growth. Therefore, by taking on night rank missions now, he would gain an edge to surpass his rivals, turning this opportunity into a chance to grow immensely as an adventurer. Luke continued, saying that the night ranking, just like the merchant ranking, placed a high value on trust. Because of that, it required not just strength, but also dignity, a quality that Lord Adel had in spades. Our hero had felt this for a while, but the picture Setsu and Luke painted of Adal was very different from the one he knew. To him, Adal was a bit of a slacker who did everything carelessly. Hearing this description, Setsu Aurelia got really angry and immediately disagreed. Luke also stepped in, stating that Adal was a man of impeccable conduct. After all, he was the greatest of all knights. To prove his point, Luke mentioned that Adal was ranked 5th among trustworthy leaders, a position you couldn't reach with swordsmanship alone, and that he was highly respected by everyone. He recalled an interview where Adal, after saving a village from monsters, said a memorable line. He said that protecting the people is a knight's duty, and their peace is the pride and weight of their swords. Setsu added that she remembered the date and all the details about that quote. As they spoke, the protagonist realized he had no idea what Adal had been up to. Their paths had become very different after they left the village. And even during training, Adal never talked about himself. He then wondered what his old master was doing at that very moment. The scene changes to a village being destroyed by a horde of monsters. In the midst of the chaos, a little girl was crying while looking for her mother until she came face to face with a giant snake. At the last second, a knight appeared and defeated the monster, assuring the girl that everything would be okay because he had arrived in time. Right after that, other knights appeared and began to eliminate the creatures in the name of the Knights of Marsus, saving everyone's lives. Suddenly, loud crash shook the area, and the knights were startled. Before them, the tyrant worm appeared, a danger level 11 monster. In shock, the knights thought they would all be wiped out and started to consider a retreat. However, one of the knights said there was no need to fall back. He simply raised his sword and used the rupture technique, slicing the tyrant worm in half and eliminating the monster once and for all. An old man from the village recognized him as the number 1 ranked knight. The hero then removed his helmet, revealing himself to be Lord Adel, the commander of the Knights of Maris. He declared that he wouldn't allow any more deaths now that he had arrived. Overcome with emotion, the entire village population began to cheer for Adel. Meanwhile, at the royal castle, Adel was extremely bored and complaining. His assistant congratulated him on a job well done and started to flatter him, but she quickly pointed to the huge pile of paperwork that had accumulated. She reminded him that he disappeared for a whole year and should appreciate the work she put into making up excuses for the other members of the order. Adal retorted that when he became commander, he warned them he would maintain the order system and play the part of a good leader for the public, but that he would disappear whenever he wanted. The assistant complained that he never answered when she asked where he was going. Then, changing the subject, she asked who had given him the scar on his chest. She explained that she saw the mark when he was changing after a fight, and that several rumors about it had spread throughout the order. To cause a wound like that on him, the opponent must have been someone very skilled. Adel agreed, but corrected her, saying the person was still going to become skilled in the future. In his thoughts, Lord Adel was happy to see that Lo Tully seemed to be doing well. He saw him on the adventurer rankings and felt proud that he had learned the holy sword style. However, he figured that at his current level, Lo could probably only use 2 techniques at most, since he knew you couldn't climb that high in the rankings with swordsmanship alone. Adel wondered if Lo had truly awakened the arts, because the prana power he felt was just terrifying. The moment his prana touched Lo's, it was completely wiped out. And even when he increased his own power to defend himself, Adel couldn't resist. He felt that for someone who had awakened such power, Lo's rank was still way too low, probably because the kid hadn't gotten used to controlling it yet. That's why Adel wanted Lo Thuli to get stronger and stronger, because he knew Lo couldn't keep stagnating in the 1000th rank, which was far too weak for his potential. Meanwhile, Setsu Aurelia found a mission that seemed perfect for the group, an escort job on the Transcontinental Railroad. The client was Thomas Belkin, the merchant ranked number 33, who needed protection during the train ride from the Kingdom of Walter to the Republic of Errol. The mission was urgent, as there were rumors that assassins sent by a rival merchant company were after him, which led him to look for skilled individuals with escort experience. At the same time, members of the Ouroboros organization were meeting in secret. One of them decided to act, stating that he would keep his plans hidden from their leader. Although he admitted it was a premature move, he insisted that the arts were too important to ignore, since they needed to find out what stage Lothuli's awakening was at. Depending on the circumstances, they considered that it might not be a problem to tell him the truth about the island of the gods, thinking they might get along with Lo better than they expected. At that moment, the member took off his hood, revealing he was a robot, and mentioned that the kid was a human who was also searching for the legendary island. The group arrived at the Dream Zephyr Station, the transcontinental railroad connecting the Kingdom of Walter to the Kingdom of Errol. The train was an impressive sight with its 31 cars capable of carrying 600 passengers on a 6,000-kilometer journey. Lo, who had never seen a train up close, was amazed as he watched the gigantic structure moving at high speed. They had a meeting scheduled with the client on the platform, and they knew it would be easy to spot Thomas Belkin because of his flashy appearance. Knowing that trust was vital for a bodyguard, Luke told Lo to show his rank card right away to make a good first impression. However, when Lo found Thomas Belkin and showed him the card, the short merchant slapped his hand away, declaring that he wouldn't entrust his life to a brat. Stepping in, Setsu Aurelia asked if the merchant had looked her up. Thomas admitted he'd seen her rank, but then Setsu revealed something that wasn't in the records. She was a Sword Saint candidate. Hearing this, Thomas Belkin was in shock, his eyes wide with surprise. The title of Sword Saint was the position given to the one who reached first place in the night rankings, and candidate was a nickname given to those ranked high enough with the potential to reach that position. Although rank was the main criterion, compatibility with the fighting style weighed heavily due to the unique nature of the required swordsmanship. Because of her talent, Setsu Aurelia had been chosen as the youngest Sword Saint candidate in history. Setsu then pointed to Lo, stating that he was even more skilled than her, a Sword Saint candidate. Lo Tuli formally introduced himself, and the merchant, now convinced, was very impressed. Next, Luke introduced herself as Lo's exclusive appraiser, which was a huge relief for Thomas Belkin. He confessed that his nerves were shot because of recent terrifying experiences and that he didn't even trust his own people. With the deal sealed, Thomas asked the trio to accompany him to his cabin so he could fill them in on the mission details. And together, they entered the golden car to begin their escort duties. When Lo Tully was asked if it was his first time on the Dream Zephyr, Luke took the opportunity to explain the train's layout. She wanted to make sure he could handle his escort duties properly. She started by showing him the bronze car where the cheapest class traveled and pointed out that their destination was the gold car located further up front. In the opposite direction, at the very back of the train was the pet area. Between the two ends, there were 2 public restaurant cars, 2 department store cars, a library car, and 6 silver cars. These were used by people a little wealthier than those in the bronze class. The train also had a large public restroom, a hospital, a garden, a swimming pool, and a luxury restaurant. Finally, they arrived at the gold car, which housed a casino and the driver's cabin. Luke explained that tickets for this area were extremely expensive, so only the very rich could afford them. She told them they could use the room next to Thomas Belkin's. Once they were settled in, Setsu Aurelia got straight to the point and asked Thomas about the enemy they'd be facing. The merchant revealed it was a rivalry involving one of his company's lifelines. When Setsu asked if he knew the Lottie company, the merchant realized they had done their homework. He understood they already knew part of the situation. Thomas Belkin then confirmed that their job was to deal with the assassins sent by the Lottie company. Setsu noticed he was being evasive, as if he was hiding something, and asked him how long he'd been a target. He replied that it was a recent development and that the enemy's goal was to make him fail in his business dealings in the Republic. However, when it came to the details of the business, he asked them not to ask too many questions. He preferred not to talk about it even if it wasn't a trade secret. Next, he asked them to watch the outside of the car while he checked the room. Once they were alone, Setsu commented that Lo was climbing the rankings at an unprecedented speed. While that was impressive, she warned that it was also a weakness since he was still inexperienced. This would be his first time fighting an assassin, and she reminded him that a ranker can't let his guard down, not even against weak enemies. Lo admitted there was so much he didn't know that his head was spinning. Luke understood, reminding him that he'd only just arrived in the capital. Curious, Lo asked how the car door had moved automatically. Luke explained that the mechanism worked with electricity, a special type of prana. She explained that their destination, the Republic of Helio, was one of the leading nations in prana research. They had the technology to convert it into energy. The Dream Zephyr itself was built with that same technology. She also mentioned that the evaluation department had similar doors, which were also supplied by the Republic of Helio. Hearing this, Lo realized just how big the world really was. He remembered that his sister Yuna would have loved to go there, and he wished she could be there with him. Interrupting his thoughts, Luke said there was something important to consider. If they went to the Republic of Helio, they might find out something about the Island of the Gods. She confessed that during her investigation for the ranking update, everything was too uncertain, and she found out almost nothing. The fact that the department also knew nothing about the place was a rare occurrence. Luke pointed out that there were two big unknowns involving Lothuli, the Island of the Gods and his own origin. She suspected this wasn't a coincidence, but inevitable. She suggested that his contact with the island might be the cause of his special arts. To reinforce her point, she asked if he remembered what Gran had said about the Republic of Helio being a nation capable of analyzing prana with precision. The idea of finally getting his prana analyzed made Lo eager to get there. Luke agreed, saying it was a fascinating country that could change his view on magic. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. Everyone felt a presence at the same time, and Setsu immediately ordered them to act normal. With little time left before the train's departure, they realized this was when the enemy would make their move. Lo wondered if the assassins were about to attack. Just as the captain was announcing the train's imminent departure, welcoming everyone aboard the Dream Zephyr, a bizarre tremor suddenly shook the car. The unexpected jolt made Lo stumble, and that loss of balance saved his life. A knife slashed through the exact spot where his head had been just seconds earlier. If it hadn't been for that involuntary movement, he would have been taken out right then and there. The assassin spun his knife with precision, remarking that the kid was lucky, but promised there wouldn't be a second chance. Emanating a huge amount of prana, he lunged forward again, preparing a second fatal attack and declaring that Lo couldn't do anything from that position. In response to the charge, Lo threw a hunting dagger at the man who dodged it easily. Taking advantage of the distraction, Lo used a feint to get under the assassin, landing a powerful punch to his chest before he could react. Then, he caught his sword in mid-air and set his stance, facing the enemy without fear. The assassin didn't hesitate and launched into a brutal assault, but Lo blocked the blow with the blade of his sword. The enemy then leaped over him, used the ceiling to gain momentum, and came back with a swift attack with his knives. Despite the speed, Lo managed to dodge two simultaneous strikes, realizing the attacks were repeatedly aimed at his solar plexus. Spotting an opening, he seized the moment and delivered a final blow that knocked the attacker out. Before he could even speak to Luke, Lo sensed the presence of two more enemies and immediately ran toward them. When he got there, he found Setsu Aurelia, who had already taken out the other two assassins. She commented that the attack happened very quickly and noted that while the enemies seemed afraid, their movements were extremely aggressive. Given how dangerous the situation was, Setsu suggested they temporarily halt their journey. However, Thomas Belkin refused the suggestion, stating that his business couldn't stop. Faced with his refusal, Setsu decided to dispose of the attackers discreetly so as not to delay the train schedule. She threw the bodies out the window, realizing that's how they had gotten in. Setsu admitted it was a brutal method, but a necessary one since there was no time to interrogate them or keep them under guard. The solution was to simply get rid of them, and she even commented that people with that skill level wouldn't die so easily. Soon after, the group met with Thomas Belkin for a strategy meeting. When asked about the assassins' level, Luke estimated they were around rank 500 in the crime rankings, which indicated a lot of combat experience. Additionally, they showed a flexibility comparable to a rank 300 knight. However, Luke felt they weren't that good in a direct confrontation. The assassin Lo faced, for example, was off balance. If he had been more stable, he could have been much more dangerous. She warned about the risk of more surprise attacks, stating that stronger enemies were likely still to come, but she believed they could handle opponents at that level. Next, Luke explained an important concept known as the digit barrier, a technical term among rankers. She detailed that in any ranking, there's a huge skill gap at the digit boundaries, like between the 10th and 9th positions or between the 100th and 99th. Even though the number only changes by 1, the jump in power is immense. The most accepted theory for this is that many rankers push themselves to the limit to cross these boundaries, creating a chasm of skill. To put it in context, she pointed out that Lo Thuli was at rank 1089 in the adventurer rankings with the 3-digit barrier right in front of him. This ranking range is considered a real hell since it's packed with adventurers desperately trying to reach the triple digits. As a result, the missions at this level are way tougher, and Luke says this could be a huge challenge for Lo. Realizing it's necessary and at Lo Tully's own request, Setsu Aurelia decides it's time to start his training. To do this, they climb to the top of the train where the wind is blowing with extreme force. Setsu decides to use this to her advantage since she'd already noticed something when they crossed swords earlier. Lo's prana control is still very basic. He clearly prioritized learning techniques over strengthening his fundamentals. Now he's forcing moves he hasn't mastered, wasting huge amounts of prana in the process. Setsu explains that the Sword Saint style is far more advanced than he thinks. And to keep up, he needs to master advanced prana techniques. Although our hero understands that these techniques are powerful, he believed he could get stronger just by practicing with his sword, but she strongly disagrees. Setsu points out that there's something fundamental he needs to fix. During their duel, he let his emotions take over, and his movements lacked clarity. To prove her point, she suddenly disappears and reappears behind him in the blink of an eye, placing her sword at his throat. She then explains that what she just did is the foundation of the Sword Saint style. It's a storm of strikes so fast they're impossible to see. That's the true essence of the style, but Lo Thuli is still way too slow to pull it off. However, she claims that if he follows her instructions correctly, he'll be able to use the third technique, an explosive and extremely difficult skill known as the Raging Rupture. Setsu reveals that what he's learned so far is just the basics, and that the more advanced techniques have an insane jump in difficulty. With a hint of frustration, she admits that even she hasn't been able to master them completely. She only copied the style by watching without ever reaching its perfect form. Still, she recognizes Lo's potential. Even though it's incomplete, he's already using the true style. This fact both bothers and motivates her. With the strong wind blowing on top of the train, the two of them finally take their stances and the training begins for real. Setsu mentions that the technique is special even among the Sword Saint styles. She recalls that Lord Adel used to say its applications were limited, but it allowed the user to take down many enemies at once. The mention of his master makes Lo truly pay even closer attention. He vividly remembers when Adel used his prana to unleash an insane slash. The sight of that man slicing through an entire mountain had left Lo completely in shock a year ago. He thought about it all the time because in that moment, Adel didn't seem like an ordinary human anymore. Setsu Aurelia's first lesson begins in a completely unexpected way. She simply takes out a rope she had bought at a shop, prompting Lo Tuli to ask if she plans on tying him up. She says no, and then gives a demonstration, tossing the rope far away with a simple motion. Setsu then says that if he can do the same thing, the lesson will be over. Feeling confident, our protagonist tries to copy the move, throwing the rope with all his might. But to his surprise, it comes right back and smacks him in the face, pushed back by the relentless wind on top of the train. Setsu Aurelia explains that's exactly why he needs more speed and control. Since the rope is so light, it requires an absurd amount of precision to cut through the wind. She then continues her lesson on prana, saying that it gets stronger the more it flows and can take on the force of a river or a waterfall. The goal is for Lo to channel this energy wherever he wants, like his hands, feet, or eyes. He has to do this without losing stability, even when he's using his maximum power. Our wild ranker then tries again. This time, he focuses prana into his arm and throws the rope, but it still doesn't go very far. Setsu Aurelia immediately points out that it's a mess, explaining that prana originates from the center of the chest. Because of that, he needs to learn to control the time it takes for the energy to reach the ends of his body. Lo tries again, now increasing the amount of prana and concentrating as hard as he can, but Setsu stops him right away. She says that's exactly what he shouldn't do and scolds him for continuing to use only brute force. Setsu warns that he'll never learn the correct technique that way, and that using prana so uncontrollably could actually make him unstable. She then breaks down the problem for him, detailing the specific flow he needs to master. By that point, Lo had already used an absurd amount of prana. Setsu calculates that if the amount needed to pass the lesson was 1, he was spending 10 to break through. Even for someone with his reserves, that isn't sustainable. And if he keeps it up, he'll run out of energy quickly. The real goal of the first lesson is efficiency and prana control, not just releasing large amounts of power. Lo, however, argues that he doesn't run out of fuel, claiming he can use much more prana than that without getting exhausted. Faced with his stubbornness, Setsu Aurelia changes her approach. Since he insists he won't run out of energy, she challenges him to release all his prana at once. Our protagonist doesn't hesitate for a second and starts to release his aura. Instantly, an absurd amount prana explodes around him, distorting the very wind blowing on top of the train. Aurelia is in complete shock. Even though she was expecting something big, this surpassed all of her expectations. Inside the train, Thomas Belkin and Luke feel the impact of that energy release. Right before a massive boom comes from the top of the car, Luke immediately recognizes that aura, noticing that the amount of prana was even greater than before. She realizes, surprised, that Lo Thuli has gotten stronger again. Meanwhile, hidden among the passengers, one of the assassins also feels that overwhelming presence and goes on high alert. He realizes there's a monster on this train, someone with an absurd level of prana comparable to a single-digit ranker. The assassin also reflects that there are only 12 hours left until the next phase of the operation, and that this person's presence could seriously interfere with their plans. Back on top of the train, Thuli's prana completely dominates the area. Setsu wonders how someone with this level of power can still maintain a human form, but at the same time feels lucky since it would surely deter any enemy. She recognizes that he's one of the world's top rankers in terms of raw prana, and finally admits to herself that Lord Adel's apprentice is, in fact, monster. Later, Setsu talks with Luke, relieved that they've finished the first stage of the training. She explains that the plan consists of 3 lessons and that starting the next day, the second part will be even more brutal. Noticing that Thomas Belkin is still in his room, she comments on his prana, mentioning that few people can truly use it. Then the topic shifts back to Lo, and Setsu observes that for a swordsman, controlling prana flow should be basic. But he wastes a huge amount during the day, probably not even using 1/10 of his power correctly. Seeing that they were alone, they switched their focus to business, and Setsu shows Luke a detailed analysis of the target they need to protect. Luke was impressed with the compiled information on Thomas Belkin's personality and tastes, noting that the common practice of hiring knights for protection wasn't just for show. Setsu Aurelia explained that 1/3 of that information was basic knowledge shared within the order, something any ranker from the Marxist Knights would learn. Then Luke found out that their target, Thomas Belkin, was the 33rd in the merchant rankings, a 46-year-old man and the second-generation president of the Belkin Trading Company. The company was a retail business that operated the Belly department stores. It started out as Belkin Pharmaceuticals, a small company that sold medicine and grew rapidly under Thomas's father's management. Thomas himself continued the expansion, increasing the number of department stores to 8 and making the company the largest of its kind in the country. Hearing all this, Luke commented that he seemed like a good person and an incredible human being. However, Setsu Aurelia countered, saying that he was cautious and had a very short fuse. She believed his initial distrust of their skills was a result of those 2 personality traits. Setsu also predicted that although he was quiet in his room at the moment, sooner or later, he would want to go out again. Taking the opportunity, Luke decided to share the information he'd found on the assassins who attacked them, showing some data from the evaluation department that made a lot of sense. He wondered if the enemies in the fight against Dalkin Iris might have used the rank cell retrieval again. Luke explained that in the forest, because it's a danger zone, there are no transmitters, which prevents communication for security reasons. That's why a special encrypted line is used for ranking updates. General communications, on the other hand, are multifunctional but have a very short range, and long-distance communicators use simple transmitters. Getting back to the assassins, Setsu commented that the 3 of them were clearly coordinating their actions. The timing of the attack was too perfect to be a coincidence since they would normally be hired individually. The precise coordination meant they were hired as a team. She explained that while it's hard to identify a single assassin, a team is different. They can be tracked by their area of operation, the skill level of their members, and the makers of the weapons they use. Based on these characteristics, she had no doubt they were from Despada, a group of assassins that held the 49th spot in the criminal organization rankings. Setsu continued her explanation, revealing that Despada is a subsidiary of Destora, the 6th most dangerous criminal organization in the rankings. Despada's high command consists of high-level ranker assassins dispatched directly from Destora. She warned that the group should be very careful as their elite could be on the train, which would make the situation much more difficult than they could handle. Meanwhile, somewhere else on the train, the man from the criminal organization was reading a cipher and saw that the preparations were complete. Sitting near the window, he noticed his companions were intimidated by that prana from before. Although he'd hoped to retire without getting his own hands dirty, he realized he had no other choice. Removing one of his gloves, he decided he would act. This was Joman Teppel, the 108th in the assassin rankings. The next day, Thomas Belkin came down from his room and started eating voraciously, commenting that the meal was worth every cent of the place's high price. He mentioned that tasting the food beforehand to check for poison had been a pain. Turning to Luke, he said that she didn't need to hold back. After all, she was the evaluator. Luke replied that an evaluator's job is to have the same experiences as the rankers so she can judge the rankings based on that. Satisfied, Thomas reminded them to protect him properly while he went for a walk to digest his food. He then went over to a selection of jewelry, finding everything magnificent, but complained that the selection of ceramics was so limited. Suddenly, he noticed a new piece by Mason, which he considered an exquisite work of art. Watching this, Luke asked Setsu if they should really be letting him go shopping under the circumstances. Setsu replied that it would be a problem if he got stressed out, so it was better to let him blow off some steam. That way, he'd be more likely to obey orders when things got dangerous. The knight stressed that they needed to stay on alert and stick close to Thomas. Then Luke changed the subject, asking how Lo Thuli's training was going since Setsu Aurelia seemed to be very strict. Lo Thuli replies that he's not tired because he's learning to use his prana more efficiently. Curious, Luke asks if he's ever run out of prana doing something other than using his arts. She finds the situation strange since prana training normally involves depleting your energy multiple times to strengthen it. However, Lo argues that you don't always run with the goal of getting out of breath. He suggests that maybe he just has a huge amount of prana, which would be unusual. Luke agrees that his amount of prana is immense, but points out that it's all consumed in a single instant when he uses his art. At first, she thought Lo's ability was to simply erase everything he touches. But if that were true, the floor should have also disappeared in the previous incident. While there are known arts that can erase things on contact, his uses up so much energy that there must be a much bigger effect to justify that cost. With Lo's permission, she offers a hypothesis. His art could be the ability to erase anything that's inconvenient for him. Lo thinks the idea is a bit of a stretch, but Luke insists that the description perfectly fits what happened. Besides, she points out that the ability doesn't make him invincible as it comes with severe drawbacks. These include the worst prana consumption she's ever seen and the fact that he passes out after using it. He can only activate it once and is unable to move for a long time afterward. This means the risk of using the ability can often be greater than the reward. At that moment, Setsu Aurelia returns and notes that the assassins still haven't shown themselves. The protagonist realizes they have no choice but to remain on high alert. Suddenly, the train's lights go out, plunging everyone into darkness. Shocked by the sudden blackout, Lo understands this is the enemy's move to confuse the crowd and make them unable to react. In the middle of the chaos, Thomas Belkin starts screaming. Setsu immediately tells him to be quiet, but it's too late. An assassin attacks, and she defends the sword strike with her dagger, realizing they use Thomas's voice to locate them. Setsu tries to sense the enemy's prana to find their positions, but the large number of people in the train car prevents her from accurately identifying the assassins. Seeing her difficulty, Lo asks if she could handle the situation if there was light. Without waiting for an answer, he starts running, telling her to keep Thomas safe. In a swift move, he thrusts his sword into the train ceiling, absorbing prana from the outside. Then he releases a bright green light that illuminates the entire car. The people around, not understanding what's happening, think the scene is beautiful and wonder if it's some kind of show. Lo knows he needs to hold on and keep the car lit until the power comes back, but his action turns him into a clear target. An assassin approaches from behind to eliminate him. It was Jamin Topol, ranked 108. The assassin realizes the young man is the source of all that prana and unleashes a powerful punch that sends him flying. Despite the impact, Lo manages to land on his feet, grabbing his sword and pointing it at the enemy, who declares that it's time to hunt monsters. Meanwhile, Setsu Aurelia realizes they've been separated. Another assassin lunges at her with a dagger, and she notices the black-painted blade is part of a well-prepared strategy. She also understands that the most skilled assassins were sent to eliminate Lo as quickly as possible. Feeling underestimated, she gets angry and activates a large amount of her prana. Sensing an attack from behind, she dodges and unleashes a devastating counterattack, instantly eliminating one of the assailants. The remaining assassin watches in shock, realizing she used an art that detonates prana to blow up his companion. In a single instant, Setsu swung her sword 3 times, creating several cuts around her that shone like flakes of light. It was an art that doesn't emit any visible prana. Cautious, the man thinks about buying some time, but he suspects it's a trap. He decides he needs to eliminate her before the train's lights come back on. He recognizes her technique as the Sword Saint style, an art of overlapping cuts of equal power that maintains a perfect balance. Using her technique, Setsu Aurelia creates a bomb of stagnant slashes that detonates the very moment an enemy gets close. The flakes of light gather and explode into a wave of prana, instantly eliminating the assassin. To Aurelia, the sword style represents absolute invincibility, and in her mind, she's the only one who can use it to its full potential. The scene shifts to a training session where the hero is practicing with a whip. Setsu Aurelia congratulates him on his success and tells him not to forget that feeling. She explains that the technique is called flow. It's something rarely seen at his rank and is more common among elite fighters. That's why she has high hopes for the protagonist, believing that once he completely masters the flow, he'll be able to control his power much more effectively. Back in the present, the hero unleashes his prana as he faces the axe-wielding assassin. The man raises his weapon, analyzing the young man's power flow. Then the two rush toward each other, their blades clashing. The hero immediately feels something is wrong, and the assassin realizes he knows how to use flow. While defending, the protagonist notices his blade starting to crack until a heavy impact forces him back. Around them, the frightened passengers finally notice that two people are fighting in the train car. The 108th ranked assassin comments that the kid has a bright future, but it's a shame he has to end that potential right now. The hero recognizes that his opponent is on another level. He's a strong man and, unlike the hero, is used to using flow masterfully. He wonders if this man is from the Despada elite that Luke mentioned. Determined to fight back, the protagonist grips his sword tighter and uses his own flow to rush toward the enemy at high speed. The assassin notes that the young man's use of prana lacks polish. He considers it a waste since the sheer volume of power he has seems like a gift from the heavens. He reflects that normally, someone born with so much power would be forced to learn how to use it. But he suspects the kid was rejected during his training, which prevented him from reaching his full potential. Declaring that he'll defeat him before he becomes a complete monster, the assassin admits that if the young man's flow were perfect, it would have been a huge problem. Then, he activates his own prana flow and attacks with his axe, striking with immense force. The hero understands what he needs to fix. He isn't able to control his flow properly. He also realizes that his flow and the Sword Saint style aren't in sync. This becomes clear when he tries to use the prana self-destruction technique. He can't use both techniques at the same time, but he still unleashes several high-level prana slashes at the enemy. The assassin easily dodges them and notes that the attempt is straining the young man, which is just another waste of his gift. Next, the assassin throws his axe at the protagonist who manages to dodge it. The weapon gets stuck in the wall of the train car. As the man goes to pull it out, he uses the motion to hurl debris at the hero. He blocks the debris, but the impact leaves him stunned. The high-ranking assassin takes advantage of the opening to charge at him again, attacking with his axe. The protagonist struggles to block the attack, but the angle of the blow leaves his sword on the verge, snapping in two. Lo truly realizes the assassin is adapting with every moment of the battle. He's thinking more during the fight, not just relying on his strength. He concludes that he shouldn't be losing when it comes to flexibility since he's faced stronger opponents before. Reminding himself that the Sword Saint style is always changing, Lo takes a new combat stance and starts to unleash even more prana. He then combines the Lotus Blossom and the Gale Slash, launching the same attacks as before, but this time simultaneously right at the assassin. However, when the assassin begins to defend himself, he notices the attacks are different than before. The high-speed slashes look like thousands of arrows. They overlap wherever they touch, making them almost impossible to dodge. Despite this, the assassin finds the strikes light and starts to parry them all at once. Noticing this, Lo explains that the attacks are weak because he's switching speeds, but they can explode, which is more than enough to hold the enemy in place. To keep it under control, he focuses all his prana into a single sword strike. The assassin is terrified by this display of power, and the attack hits him square in the stomach. Confident after the attack, Lo knocks the assassin down with a heavy blow and feels relieved, happy to have won somehow. However, a sudden pressure on his shoulders forces him to the ground. The assassin reveals his axe was coated in a poison that can kill a mortal with a single scratch. At that moment, the young hero remembers being grazed when the weapon got stuck in the wall. He asks for the antidote. The assassin pulls it out of his pocket only to smash it right in front of him. Lowe's is left in shock as the assassin says it's time for a monster like him to die. Right at that moment, his 3 companions arrive. They find him pale and realize he's been poisoned. Setsu Aurelia notices that the broken glass on the floor was the antidote and that the medicine on the train won't work. Lowe then asks the 2 of them to step back as he wants to test something. He decides to use his tribe's enchantment, a special art that can detoxify him. He uses the Tool tribe's art enchantment, the descent of the celestial spirit. He focuses all his prana into his body and easily purifies the poison. He survives, surprising everyone with his technique. Soon after, an announcement is made to the passengers that the surprise performance in the train car is over. It reminds passengers getting off the train not to forget their belongings. It also states that passengers heading to the Republic of Aereo cannot disembark. Setsu Aurelia comments that they made the announcement just like they asked. Thomas Belkin replies that, of course, they did since he invested a lot of money in the train. He skillfully managed to cover up the fight in the library car, while Setsu told the witnesses it was an improvised fight by performers. Even if they didn't buy it, what matters is that the rest can be handled with some compensation as an apology. Luke then approaches Lowe Tully, saying that he's figured out the nature of his ability. He explains that the core of the art of the descent of the celestial spirit is survival. It automatically eliminates anything that gets in the user's way, like targeted attacks or sources of pain. However, he warns that the price for an ability that breaks the laws of nature is steep since Lowe can't move. The most important thing is how he uses this art, as Luke noticed that its duration is only 10 seconds. During these 10 seconds, Lowe becomes totally invincible and can defeat anyone, keeping in mind that victory is guaranteed if he can drag the fight out for that period. Lowe Tully agrees that strategy will be key when using these arts. Intrigued, Setsu Aurelia asks how he defeated a more skilled assassin using strategies. He explains that he used the lotus and turned all the slashes into gales, focusing on just landing the hits. He reminds them that both the gale and the lotus are basic techniques in the Sword Saint style. Lowe explains that the great thing about his techniques is their flexibility, especially the lotus, which can be used in all sorts of ways. He showed that he could throw it directly at an enemy, stick it to an object, and even detonate it later. Setsu comments that this is different from the Galaxy style, which is all about constant change. She promises to explain these major swordsmanship styles in more detail later. In her eyes, he has finally become worthy of Sword Saint style. With that, they get ready for the second lesson. He thanks Setsu Aurelia for the training, saying it was even better than Adel's classes. The comparison makes her furious, and she reacts by saying that's absurd because Lord Adel's teachings are the best in the world. Furious, she even points a sword at him, thinking he was just bragging about being taught by such an important person. However, the hero was just trying to give her a sincere compliment, but she didn't understand his intention. The conversation then shifts to the enemy. Setsu Aurelia suggests they might back off now that Lowe Tully has defeated a skilled member of Despada. Luke, however, corrects her, saying the assassin was just a regular member and not from the top ranks. He warns that if they had been ambushed by a true elite member, they would have died the instant the lights went out. Luke concludes grimly that the fight isn't over yet and that they've just been very lucky so far. Meanwhile, at the central train station, a little girl watches a man in clown makeup juggling knives. The clown reflects that if the kid fails, he'll have to step in on the train himself. He supposes that the man sent earlier lost the fight because he was too rusty, used to only doing office work. Since this failure is messing with their operations, the clown concludes he has no choice but to get on board himself. Suddenly, a gold coin falls to the ground. When a person tries to pick it up, the clown aggressively stops them, telling them not to touch it. He picks it up desperately, commenting that his old habits from his beggar days are coming back, as he survived in the past thanks to handouts. At that moment, a man bumps into him and apologizes. The clown notices the man's exotic face and asks if he's from the Republic. The man who is wearing a metal mask confirms that he is and says he's returning home after a long time to see someone important. Back on the train, the hero joins the group and Setsu asks if he was able to sleep. He replies that he did and that he even talked in his sleep. Seeing that the night passed without any incidents, he asks how far they are from the Republic of Aereo. Luke informs him that they left the central station the previous night and are already halfway there. Thomas Belkin, who has been more cautious since the attack, announces that it's lunchtime and he's going to eat in his room. Seizing the opportunity, Setsu says she has something to say about the assassin Lowe defeated. She argues that although he seems strong, it's likely that someone even more skilled will show up. With that in mind, she confronts Thomas Belkin directly, asking if he's hiding something. The man breaks out in a cold sweat and asks why she's so suspicious. Setsu then explains that it makes no sense to hire an assassin of that caliber for a simple business dispute, as he had claimed. She's certain there's another reason for the chase, so she gives him an ultimatum. If he stays quiet, they'll cancel the mission. Setsu points out that when a client doesn't give them all the necessary details, they have the right to back out to avoid dangerous fights. She finishes by saying that since they have Luke with them, the evaluation department will certainly side with them in the decision. Desperate, Thomas Belkin promises he'll explain everything and pay more than they agreed if they continue to protect him. He reveals that he's in the middle of a negotiation to secure the mining rights for a material known as insect steel, the raw material for Papillon. Thomas explains that Papillon is an infamous drug, and its main ingredient is a powder processed from this steel. It's easy to produce as long as you have the materials, which makes it hard to monopolize. However, the growing demand guarantees a profit. Because it's a major source of extra income used to finance cartels, criminal organizations have been using Papillon since it first appeared. With this revelation, Thomas's conflict becomes clear. It involves not just a rival company, but also criminal organizations. The hero then asks him why he needs the insect steel, and Thomas gets worked up, insisting it's not to manufacture Papillon. The sincerity in his voice convinces the group to continue the mission. Setsu realizes that just like in the Azaban forest, the mission's difficulty is increasing, which in turn raises its rank. She decides to take advantage of this God-sent opportunity, since a high-difficulty mission like this is perfect for raising their rank and earning better rewards. Setsu's personal goal is to raise her rank, so she can inherit the Sword Saint style, and eventually take Lord Adu's place as the #1 knight. She believes that if she gets closer to the top, Lord Adu's opinion of her will change. Now that they're companions on the same mission, she decides to resume her training with Lo Thuli. Setsu states that their opponent's combat power exceeded their expectations, so they need to perfect Lo's flow as quickly as possible since he's able to activate it. She explains that he must have already noticed how the flow fundamentally changes combat, and that the goal of the second lesson is maintenance and stability. To do this, she orders Lo to run outside alongside the train, which leaves him in shock when he sees how fast they're moving. Meanwhile, without them noticing, a metallic insect begins to watch their conversation. A robot-like man spots Lo Thuli with 3 companions and notes that they're on an escort mission. He reflects that even though they just went through a life-or-death battle in the Azaban forest, they're still climbing the ranks, determined to go to the island of the gods. Elsewhere, a man dressed as a clown brutally beats up 3 people, the assassins who failed the mission. He scolds them for drawing unnecessary attention, stating that the Despota organization has a reputation to uphold. The assassins defend themselves, saying the guards were a hunker knight and a swordswoman with monstrous prana. The clown decides he'll investigate the knight, since their prana has a characteristic tingle that makes it easy to identify. Noticing that his subordinates are trying to escape through the window, he decides to finish them off immediately. The clown sticks his head out, grabs his knives, and leaning his body, throws 2 of them towards the protagonists on the other train. In that same instant, the robot man fires a shot from his window, knocking the clown's knives out of the air and preventing them from hitting their target. The clown is confused, not understanding what happened. The robot knows it would be problematic to interfere directly, but he believes that if Lo Tully's training leads to the awakening of his art, it will benefit his own organization. Respecting the clown's desire to act, the robot decides to use him as a guinea pig. He sends a metallic beetle that lands on the clown's shoulder and stings him in the neck. The man feels a sharp and incredibly heavy pain as an injection of nanomachines begins to enter his body. The robot calculates 7 minutes until the completion of the terminalization, hoping that the now enhanced clown will pressure Lo Thuli in the right way. Back to the training, we see Lo running outside the train, desperately trying to keep up with its speed until he finally gives up and collapses from exhaustion. Setsu Aurelia throws a rope to Lo, who grabs it firmly. Using her flow, the girl pulls him back onto the train. He reflects that unlike his prana, his physical stamina isn't infinite, and pushing himself too hard could mess up the mission. When asked about the training, he assures her he'll handle it because he finally understood the goal of the second lesson. Just running normally wasn't enough. The instant his feet touch the ground again, he concentrates prana into them to run faster, maintaining a continuous flow. Although he managed to surpass the train's speed, a small fluctuation in power made him trip and fall right away. Even so, he feels like he's getting the hang of it and realizes he needs more practice to balance his body with the power of the flow. Setsu Aurelia praises how quickly he's learning, and then Lo asks about the whereabouts of the evaluator, Luke. He finds out that she's interrogating Thomas and checking his background, just as a precaution. Although Thomas denies any involvement with drug trafficking, they're still considering the possibility that he's planning another crime. If that's true, the mission will have to be cancelled. However, Setsu doubts that Thomas is a bad person, remembering how he seemed genuinely happy while bragging about his shop and praising a competitor's vase. Lo agrees, guessing that he's just an ordinary merchant. Setsu builds on that reasoning, stating that someone obsessed with money wouldn't give such a sincere compliment, and adds that Thomas has donated fortunes to drug rehabilitation clinics. With that in mind, she decides to wait for the result of Luke's investigation, confident it will prove their client's innocence. Before the assassin arrives, Setsu explains the third and final lesson, the fusion of the flow with the sword saint style, something that can only be learned through practice. She asks Lo to keep the flow active the entire time, and he understands. At that exact moment, the clown ambushes them from the ceiling, landing on the floor and commenting that the timing was perfect. Setsu Aurelia immediately suspects that he heard their entire conversation, and sure enough, the robot's metallic beetle was present, probably transmitting everything. Luke appears suddenly, but Lo Thuli yells for her to go back. Meanwhile, he quickly analyzes the enemy. The clown is 1 meter and 80 centimeters tall, weighs 80 kilograms, and is from the northwest continent. From the details, like his overdeveloped forearms, he identifies him as a member of the Despada organization. Despite being unarmed, Lo realizes he's high-ranking, and his strength is on another level. He recognizes him as Nile Shooter, the number 21 ranked assassin. Setsu Aurelia reinforces the danger, warning that he has the ability to turn anything he touches into a deadly projectile. Nile Shooter immediately puts his ability into practice, throwing objects at Lo, who manages to dodge. Then, the assassin throws an entire sofa and Lo dodges by a hair, realizing that without Setsu's warning, that projectile would have been fatal. He had never faced a throwing master before. Observing more closely, he notices that the clown's eyes indicate he's being controlled by some technology, which explains why he attacks with so much force and without any expression. Setsu Aurelia notices something even more dangerous. He's reinforcing each projectile with his own flow, causing each throw to be fired like a cannon shot. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Lo asks Setsu to take Luke and Thomas to a safe place. They notice that, for some reason, the clown is targeting him exclusively. Setsu is confused, not understanding why the mission's main target, Thomas, is being ignored. Since the third lesson was practical combat, Lo decides that this is the perfect opportunity to perfect using his flow in a real fight. Setsu agrees, promising to come back as soon as she gets the others to safety, and she leaves with the two of them. Alone, Lo settles into his combat stance. Immediately, the clown launches a series of chaotic and extremely fast attacks. Lo uses his sword to defend against the reinforced projectiles, but the assassin throws two objects at the same time, which leaves him momentarily unsure how to react. To compensate, he quickly channels flow to his left foot, right foot, and to both of his fists, preparing to go on the offensive. With quick footwork and swift arm movements, he dodged the attacks and slashed with his sword, sending the projectiles flying. To Lo, the killer clown was just a stepping stone he needed to overcome to reach the island of the gods. Nile Shooter's story was a tragic one. He was an orphan taken in by a circus troupe, not to become a performer, but to be sold into human trafficking. To escape this fate, Nile stole the techniques of the other troupe members. Thanks to this, he managed to push out the mediocre juggler and take his place. Day and night, he practiced throwing non-stop, knowing that if he failed, he would be discarded. Even after the troupe went bankrupt, he kept juggling because he didn't know any other way to make a living until an assassin took him in. This was a miraculous discovery. His innate talent for eliminating targets blossomed. When combined with his throwing skills, it transformed into a formidable power. Nile killed countless villains this way, becoming the 21st strongest assassin in the world. Now, however, because of a mysterious scientist, he had become a puppet with no will of his own, and he was attacking Lo like a madman. The hero kept dodging until the clown threw projectiles at a chandelier to create a distraction. Seizing the opportunity, Neil jumped on top of Lo, unleashing slashing attacks and throwing more objects. His ammunition was constantly replenished by the debris his own attacks created. This prevented Lo from getting close as long as he had something in his hands. Faced with this, the hero waited for the perfect moment to strike. He waited for the projectiles to pass him and then unleashed a gale skill. Lo's technique destroyed the projectiles before the clown could reload. Then, he used his flow to close the distance in an instant and charge at the assassin. Surprisingly, Nile shattered the floor, using the new debris to reload and launch a new barrage at Lo. By this point, the train was completely destroyed. Even so, the hero managed to dodge the last blow and appear behind the clown. He used a hole he had made in the ceiling himself to launch the surprise attack right after he jumped through this opening, and the fight continued on top of the train. As he fought, Lo kept channeling the flow of prana through his feet and body. He remembered that a master's technique is the best example to follow. He had great mentors, like the knight who trained him, Lord Adel, the strongest man in humanity, even if it was only for 1 year. Besides him, a young sword saint candidate and a miracle assassin also lit his path. With this in mind, he decided to change his perspective, realizing he couldn't move like he used to while using the flow. He could barely even run, so there was no way he could use the sword saint style he originally learned. That was just a temporary form for when he didn't know how to use the flow yet. Therefore, Lo would have to recreate everything from scratch, adapting the sword saint style to the flow of prana to finally master Lord Adel's true style. He then used the blade of the island technique against the killer clown, unleashing a slash that surged forward with a gale. The clown blocked the attack and seemed to be unharmed. However, right after, a lot of vital fluid began to leak from his body, revealing he was seriously injured. Our hero realized that the combination of the flow and the style had worked. He was finally managing to master Lord Adel's sword saint style. Now he could move on to the next technique, the third in the style called Fury for Cataclysm. At that moment, Lo again noticed the clown's eyes, which contained a technological mechanism. He understood that although the saint style was a fascinating research subject, that wasn't what the controlling robot wanted to see. The entity wanted Louis Thule to show his tribe's art. Suddenly, the clown began to unleash his prana flow in an overwhelming torrent. The hero noticed there were 2 colors of prana around him, but he decided not to think about it and just focus on the fight. He then saw that the enemy had a hidden weapon revealed right as he ripped his own shirt open. Lo realized the clown was extremely strong and still had more daggers on him. Using his 2-colored prana, the enemy hurled the blades at him, but Lo used the wind from his sword to deflect the attacks. He kept pressing the clown and tried to advance. However, his body suddenly froze. He felt heavy and figured it was a side effect of using the sword saint style with the flow. His prana was overflowing and the cost had been too high. With his body trembling, he noticed the clown had vanished. Suddenly, a tree was hurled in his direction, forcing him to dodge even though he was exhausted. He noticed the clown was in the forest, keeping pace with the train as he ripped out trees and threw them at it. The scene reminded him of his fight against Dakin. Determined not to let the trees hit the train and jeopardize the mission, he decided to focus his attacks on the clown while he was in the air. To do this, he channeled prana into his feet and took a huge leap to meet his enemy, refusing to lose a battle of pure power. When Lo started using the island's ability, the robot declared that now was the time. The clown then leaped toward him at an absurd speed, and the hero realized he was about to take the attack head-on. However, at the last second, the enemy grabbed his heel to slam him into the ground. Knowing it would be the end if he was thrown by that lunatic, Lo saw he had no choice and decided to use a secret technique. He began to chant the incantation of the Thule tribe, which was exactly what the robot was waiting to see. Our hero saw the robot and wondered if it was backup for the clown, but he couldn't stop now that he had activated his art. The robot announced that from that moment on, it would analyze Lo Tully's art. Suddenly, several claws shot out toward the hero, making a high-pitched sound as the purity of the prana amplified the technique's power. The robot confirmed the ability to interfere with phenomena, but noted that the connection to Babel had failed. Even so, the effort was too much, and our protagonist collapsed on the ground completely exhausted. The robot asked if that was all the boy could do and introduced itself as Gem Contrato, a member of Ouroboros. Our hero had never heard of the crime rankings or the organization. Gem explained that just like him, they were also seeking the island of the gods. Gem said the clown was no longer useful and eliminated him with its weapon, leaving Louis stunned by the action. Right after, a beetle crawled out of the clown's body and returned to the robot's shoulder. Jem explained that it was a prison beetle, a small terminal it had developed that operates on prana. Besides being used for communication, the beetle injects nanomachines into its targets to turn them into a terminal. This meant it could infuse its prana into anyone and turn them into its puppet. Just then, Setsu Aurelia appeared. Seeing Louis on the ground, she asked if he was okay, realizing he had used his art and that's why he was so tired. Immediately, a blast full of prana from gems shot toward her, but Setsu managed to dodge it. It warned her not to interfere, stating that eliminating her would mean nothing to it. Even though he was exhausted, our hero began to manifest prana and tried to get up. The robot noticed that his prana generation had started. It identified him as the type who converts a sense of crisis into power and wondered if he had some trauma related to loss. Right after that, Gem Contrado said this would be very quick and snapped its fingers. The train's speed increased drastically as it had taken over the control system. It challenged Louis, saying that now he had to show everything he had because if he couldn't stop it, many passengers would die. Thinking about the innocent passengers, our hero started to get back on his feet, screaming with rage. It was then that from behind the robot, Setsu Aurelia appeared and landed a direct hit on the back of its neck. But Setsu's attack ricocheted off a barrier that suddenly appeared. She realized the shield was abnormally tough. And at that exact moment, Luke appeared to help Louis, grabbing him by the shoulders to get him out of there. The robot decided not to waste time going after them, since it was no longer interested in Louis now that he couldn't use his tribe's arts. Gem Contrado even commented that the boy didn't look like a member of Despada, which made Setsu Aurelia wonder what that enemy's affiliation and goal were. To provoke him, Gem asked if Louis would be more motivated if he eliminated Setsu Aurelia. The girl got annoyed by his inability to have a normal conversation, and so the fight was on. On one side, Setsu Aurelia, the knight, ranked 305, and on the other, Gem Contrado, the prana scholar, ranked number 2. An intense battle began between them while Louis was carried away by Luke. Setsu quickly assumed the runaway train was the robot's doing, noticing that it had used a rearguard technique. As the fight unfolded, the evaluator took Louis to the hospital car, which was quite a ways off. Luke hid the young man in a private room in the silver car and then asked who that man was. Louis revealed that he was a member of Ouroboros, which left Luke in complete shock. She knew about all the crimes they had committed. After all, Ouroboros was the evil organization that dominated the top of the criminal rankings. Its members were the most feared people in the world, and now they were on this train after Thomas. It was then that Luke understood their real reason for being there was Lo Thule, not Thomas Belkin. Worried, she decided she would research Thule later, laying him down in the medical bay for now to think about what to do next. Luke knew that if the enemy was Ouroboros, she wouldn't be able to handle it alone. However, she couldn't fight right now either, because if she didn't stop the train, everyone would die. The mission was no longer just an escort, and she felt uneasy about the lack of people to help. Just then, Thomas Belkin showed up saying he wanted to check on Louis since he didn't want to stay locked in his room during such a critical situation. He quickly noticed that Louis had a prana deficiency and decided he would use an aggressive treatment. Thomas confirmed that the available medicine and instruments were sufficient and began to prepare them, explaining that he was the son of a pharmacist. Luke gently asked him to take care of Lo Thule and said she was going to stop the runaway train right now. With that, she headed for the cockpit to see what she could do. Over the loudspeakers, the captain was repeatedly telling passengers to brace for impact and evacuate the cars. Everyone started running desperately toward the rear cars. In the midst of the chaos, Luke used her trained eye and recognized a mechanic ranker asking for his help to stop the train. She identified him by the calluses on his fingers and immediately sent him to the engineer's cabin, an order he promptly obeyed. Luke explained that evaluators are observers who solve problems on their own, and for that very reason, their eyes are extremely well trained. She knew exactly which rankers were needed to resolve the situation and how many it would take. So she called out, asking if there were any rankers at level 40 or higher in mechanics and level 120 in prana scholarship. Meanwhile, Thomas was administering the medicine to Louis. He imagined the boy must be very suspicious of him, maybe thinking that Thomas had made a fake request so a villain could profit from drugs using the insect steel. However, to his surprise, Louis said he didn't doubt him. As a ranker, he knew that the number 33 was incredible and that Belkin must have spent an absurd amount of time to get there. Louis said he believed in the effort the man with the mustache had put in. Thomas Belkin, touched by his trust, said he would save him just this once. He warned that the medicine would shorten his life because it was a very drastic treatment, but that it was better than dying. He then asked the adventurer Ranker to protect him in the future, as he knew Lewis wasn't the type of man to just stand still in a place like that. At that moment, Thomas's memories came flooding back, remembering how he needed money in his childhood. His father was a kind-hearted man, but had no knack for business. And because of that, his mother left home and abandoned them. From that day on, Thomas and his father were constantly mocked for being seen as a pathetic family. The thought of needing money constantly consumed him, leading him to make a drastic decision. He took a medicine that could become a dangerous drug depending on how it was used. Remembering what he learned from his father, he started a business from scratch. He promised good drug-related merchandise to anyone who bought the medicine from his shop, which attracted thugs and turned them into his customers. Unaware of the truth, his father simply did his best to serve everyone as well as he could. Little by little, the pharmacy shed its pathetic atmosphere and became a place of kindness and vitality. Rumors of their great service spread through the village, and their customer base grew very quickly because they always strived to do honest and clean business. However, Thomas didn't realize he had done something irreversible because the actions of the past don't just disappear. Feeling like he had made a fool of his father, he decided to spend his life atoning for his sins. Years later, as the president of the Belkin Trading Company, he became a merchant ranker on the recommendation of an appraiser, even though he said he didn't feel qualified for the position. The appraiser then asked if his refusal was because of his past involvement with illegal drug trafficking. She explained that she was making the offer fully aware of these factors, and that she also knew he had donated large sums of money to rehabilitation centers to redeem himself. In her view, Thomas Belkin had redeemed himself a long time ago, and was therefore worthy of support. The appraiser asked him to spread his righteous will to more people. It was only as an adult that he realized his father was a truly great man, and that they had always tried to do honest business. So Thomas made a deal. He would become a ranker, but he would turn himself in as soon as he felt he had done enough to pay for his mistakes. The appraiser accepted his condition, and that's how he became the number 33 merchant. Back in the present, he explains to our hero that the medicine he's giving him is beneficial depending on how it's used. He needs to make this new venture succeed no matter what. By increasing the demand for the legitimate medicine, they can eradicate the illegal drug market. If he can accomplish this, he'll feel like he has finally done enough. Our hero, moved by the story, says he wants to stop by Mr. Thomas's shop next time. Belkin replies that he will, if they're both still alive in the future. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Setsu Aurelia was facing the Ouroboros member, noticing that her blade couldn't cut him. She decided she first needed to deal with the iron wall that was his defense, a technique of understanding and solidifying prana taught in the Republic. The enemy realized she didn't know the technique and told her not to worry, but Setsu stated that this wasn't a classroom and she would figure it out. Next, she tried to attack him from behind, but he predicted the move and fired his weapon at the exact moment, grazing her. Her opponent explained that her weakness was in the movement of her prana flow, and that his technique, called fluidity, was the perfect counter. To him, her prana was boring in many ways. Setsu Aurelia quickly noticed he was a specialized type of opponent. He was very strong in knowledge and equipped with cutting-edge technology despite his low physical abilities. Faced with this, she decided to use overwhelming firepower to brute force her way through his armor. Channeling an immense amount of prana into her sword, she took the stance for the third technique of the Sword Saint style, Destructive Fury. This was a sword of pure destruction. The golden rule for this technique, which puts a heavy strain on the weapon, is to strike using the blunt side of the blade. After all, the prana-coated blade specializes in crushing rather than cutting, making it the only impact technique in the Sword Saint style. With everything prepared, the ranked knight used the skill Fury, unleashing the destructive blow of the Sword Saint style on Gem. A violent explosion of prana kicked up a thick cloud of smoke. However, another projectile suddenly shot out from the dust, grazing Setsu Aurelia's shoulder once again. On the other side, Gem emerged with his circuits broken and exposed. He admitted it was a decent hit, but that it wasn't quite enough to destroy him. Seeing the various wires sticking out of his body, Setsu asked what he was made of. Gem replied that she seemed to have some value as a research subject. He explained that the Sword Saint style changes subtly depending on the user, and as an unorthodox successor, she would be a perfect case study. Setsu Aurelia then admitted that she really was a failure. And at that exact moment, the true successor appeared. Lo Thuli returned, emanating an immense amount of prana, which made the robot notice he had come back to life. The adventurer, still ranked 1089, declared that he was going to end this. In response, Gem Contrado, Prana Scholar number 2, took out his pistol and aimed it at the protagonist. Lo told Setsu to leave the rest to him since in her current state, she would only get in the way. Trusting in the true sword saint style that Lo possessed, she backed away, letting him prepare to face the Prana Scholar. Although Lo had recovered, he didn't have much prana to use against the robot, so he intended to end the fight as quickly as possible. He immediately charged at the enemy, but his opponent blocked the attack with a shield incredibly fast, merging flow and other techniques. Lo realized that Gem wasn't just reacting, but was actually anticipating his movements with enhanced reflexes. Faced with this, he launched a series of gale cuts, which the robot defended with its shields. A device called a cellular beetle automatically put up a barrier in response to Lo's prana, but a barrage of attacks like that would use up its charges. Seeing that its defenses were about to give way, the robot took its weapon and fired a very powerful prana shot. As he fired, Gem commented that Lo Thuli was quite adept at fighting, like a descendant of Babel. The hero didn't understand what he was talking about when he mentioned that name. The robot then explained that it had to do with the island of the gods and that he could tell him more if he wanted to know. However, there was one condition involving Vantalet. Lo would have to join Ouroboros. Gem stated that although Lo didn't have much strength, he had a lot of room to grow. And because of that, he had earned the right to know the truth. To show his sincerity, Gem decided to share something that connected the island of the gods directly to Lo. He revealed that he knew the surname Thuli was taken from the village because the Thuli clan never originally existed. A long time ago, there was a clan known as Babel, which refused to forgive the atrocities committed by the island of the gods and took up arms against it. However, the Babel clan was defeated and its members scattered into 9 tribes to survive. The Thuli tribe was one of them, which made Lo a descendant of Babel. Gem continued, explaining that the past war caused the island to suffer significant losses. And for that reason, the island of the gods fears the descendants of Babel. They hunt down and eliminate all of these descendants, and that was the real reason Lo's village was targeted. His ancestors lost, scattered, and one of the factions became Tori village. This revelation matched the story Lo's father had told him when he was a child. Still suspicious, Lo said he didn't want to blindly trust anyone. But assuming the story was real, he asked what atrocities were happening on the island of the gods. The robot replied that he couldn't tell him that until Lo became his ally, but he did confirm that these atrocities are still happening today. Gem finished by saying that it was obvious from the ranking changes that Lo was trying to reach the island. Therefore, he should already understand that no matter how many lives he had, it wouldn't be enough. Gem then asked him how long he planned to continue these meaningless fights. Lo knew his enemies had always been out of his league, so it wouldn't be strange if he died several times. That's why he admitted Gem Contrado wasn't wrong for calling his fights meaningless. Still, Lo asked why the robot had derailed the train so recklessly, and Gem replied that it was just to gauge the protagonist's strength. Hearing that, Lo declared that what Gem was doing was no different from the atrocities on the island of the gods. In his eyes, throwing away lives is the most evil thing anyone can do. He declared that, because of this, they would never be on the same side. In response, Gem claimed that sacrifices are necessary for the greater good, something Lo just couldn't understand. Stating it had no interest in fools, the robot fired a shot as the barriers shifted, threatening Lo and saying he needed to be taught a lesson. At that moment, Lo remembered the sharp cut Setsu Aurelia had made on his shoulder, a clear message that brute force was more effective. Understanding the message, he immediately activated the Ruin Fury technique. His attack collided with the robot's shot, releasing a massive amount of energy, and Lo used the momentum to deliver an upward slash. Ruin Fury had a surprisingly destructive power, but the technique was useless if the robot could maintain its distance. Realizing the Sword Saint style was far more than he had imagined, Lo unleashed another Ruin Fury move against the robot. Seeing the shockwave approach, Gem Contrado panicked and threw up several layers of shields, but they were destroyed one by one. He couldn't block the whole thing. In that instant, he remembered what the Nidus had said. He realized that true user of the Sword Saint style, on a level completely different from anything he'd ever seen, was standing right in front of him. A moment later, the robot was hit by the attack and completely destroyed. After defeating the enemy, Lo sheathed his sword, relieved. Luke and Setsu Aurelia showed up right after, happy that he had won. To everyone's shock, the robot kept talking even without its body. Setsu Aurelia was especially shaken to see the head talking by itself. Jem said the evaluator would have some idea of what was going on, and Luke then explained that it was related to pranics. The robot was actually a puppet remotely controlled by prana. It was one of many terminals connected to a main body using technology from the Republic of Aereo that was centuries ahead of their own. The robot congratulated Lo, telling him they should be happy they defeated a terminal, because it wasn't an easy task. Lo had a lot of questions, but he had another priority. He ordered Jem to stop the train, reminding the robot of the promise it made in case it was defeated. However, the robot claimed it didn't remember any such promise. It added that there was no reason to stop the train since it was already about to derail, and there was an excellent mechanic on board to save them. Luke added that the train's destination was the Republic of Aereo, a nation with advanced prana technology, and that's why there were plenty of capable rankers on board. Jem said its time there had been unexpectedly meaningful, and it was only a matter of time before its connection was switched to another terminal. Taking the opportunity, Lo asked about everything that happened on the Island of the Gods, including the atrocities and the history of the Babel clan. He also asked if his sister, Yuna, was still alive and if the people wiped out by the island were still living in some form. The robot answered that the answers to all of this were deeply connected to the goals of Ouroboros, and as long as Lo refused to join them, it couldn't tell him anything. However, it warned him that if he heard the answers, he would fall into deep despair. Then Jem said goodbye, saying that if Lo continued hunting the Island of the Gods, they would meet again somewhere below the line. Elsewhere, the robot's main body awakens, thinking that the data collection on Lo went well. He notices that Lo Tully's techniques are still incomplete, just as he expected. But he believes that, at this point, the boy should be able to connect with Babel eventually. Deciding to keep observing him as the leader predicted, he plans to do some research before meeting the protagonist again. Suddenly, his head is ripped from his body by a swordswoman. He notes with a bit of irony that it seems to be a day where he'll lose his head multiple times. A pink-haired woman scolds him, saying he has no sense of danger and asking if he's gotten too used to the pranics' bodies. The robot asks who she is, but the woman just answers with another question. After analyzing her prana, he first deduces she's from the Babel clan, but he quickly realizes that she actually belongs to the Thuli tribe. Intrigued, the woman asks how he knows that. In the same instant, she starts emanating an extremely strong green prana, identical to Lo's. The amount of energy is so immense, it seems to make the earth shake. She then confronts him, asking if he dared to lay a single finger on Lo Thuli. The Pranax puppet realizes that, as a descendant of Babel, this woman is much closer to completing her potential than Van Thuli was. He also remembers there are two uses for the humans abducted to the Island of the Gods. The woman asks if his main body is there, but she already knows the answer. Using a regressive prana trace, she realizes he converted his main body into energy and scattered his consciousness across the world. He abandoned his flesh to become a pure being. Seeing his surprise, she asks why he's so shocked by her accuracy. After all, he already knows that this kind of thing is possible with the power of Babel. She reveals she was sent to eliminate the prana scholar, and then begins to use the Thuli tribe's enchantment. Gencontrado realizes he was careless to use that terminal as a starting point because this human has the power to erase parts of his very existence. As a final act, he activates the autonomous mode of his cellular visor to deliver a message to the leader. He warns that the Island of the Gods has acquired a dangerous pawn, this woman. At that exact moment, she finishes the spell and declares that death is the fate of those who defy the gods, eliminating the robot once and for all. Meanwhile, at the central station in the Republic of Aereo, the protagonist and his team see Thomas Belkin safely. Lo Thuli notices he's being more sincere than in their first meeting. It's a surprising attitude for a merchant ranker used to a world of corruption. Thomas thanks the group, saying that if it weren't for them, he would have died during the trip. He guarantees they'll receive a good reward. Knowing that Lo cares more about rankings than money, Thomas promises to give him a fitting reward as soon as they visit his shop. Lo and Setsu Aurelia agree that he's a very confusing person, but he doesn't seem like a bad guy. Finally, they arrive in the Republic of Aereo, a place that lives up to its reputation as a nation developed in terms of prana. Luke comments that he's been there several times since his office's technology is supported by the Republic. Setsu has also traveled there for advanced technology training. Our hero notices that this is a completely different world from the kingdom of Voltaire. The group's first stop is the certification office to update their rankings. Luke saw everything Setsu Aurelia is capable of, so she'll be getting her ranking changed too. To speed up the process, she had already organized all the paperwork on the train. They start with Lothuli's ranking first. He went from 1089 to 924, finally reaching the triple digits. Although he thought it would go up even more. Luke explains that breaking the triple-digit barrier in one go is very impressive. He states that many rankers take from 1 to even 10 years to cross that mark. He says this promotion is proof that Lo's talent is genuine. Right after, Setsu Aurelia's ranking climbs to 188, which makes her extremely happy. With their goodbyes approaching, Setsu says her next step is to go to the place where the first sword master trained, the birthplace of the sword style. She explains that although they have to cross steep mountains, catching a plane from there will make the trip much easier. Before leaving, she shares a rumor that Adel has been spotted in the Holy Land and reveals her plan to ask to be his disciple. Even if she can't, she wants to at least stay near him to learn from his experience. Setsu then asks if Lo Tully has any message for Lord Adel, and he asks her to simply say that he's making steady progress. After they say their goodbyes, Luke comments that they'll definitely meet again. Because in the world of rankers, records are always being broken, and one day, they'll need to rely on each other again. Now that they're alone, Luke suggests they complete their own objective in the city, which is to get Lo's prana examined. To do that, they head to the National Research Institution since it's a hub for world-class students. She's sure someone there will know the best way for him to use his prana. Luke's target is the number 3 ranked prana scholar, a master known by the title of the Great Teacher. Even though there are rumors he's selfish, his skills are incredibly useful and well known. When they get to the research center, they speak with a pranks receptionist who informs them that they might have to wait the whole year to get an appointment with the Great Teacher. Apparently, he started a bizarre research project, and the earliest opening is already booked, which just goes to show how the Republic is all about research. Faced with this obstacle, Luke takes the lead, yelling that negotiations are a job for human certifiers and that she'll find a way for them to meet the professor and fast. While Luke is deep in negotiations with the receptionist, a man in a lab coat runs toward Lo, saying the young ranker is getting in his way. The scientist explains that the professor started another crazy research project and running low on energy, he asks Lo to release some of his prana into a containment device. The plan was for him to release just enough while the scientists manage the glass to keep it from breaking. However, when he releases his green prana into the container, the energy is so massive that the scientists scream for him to stop, but it's already too late. The containment unit shatters and prana floods the entire room. Just then, the Great Teacher appears, drawn in by the energy, and asks whose aura that is. The scientists tell him the donor has a massive amount of energy, but the professor says the most impressive part is the purity of the prana, which was vibrating intensely, a phenomenon he's never seen in his entire life. He then introduces himself to Lo as Newman Lehoner, the number 3 ranked prana scholar, the Great Teacher. Meanwhile, Luke finally finishes her negotiation. Annoyed that Lo wandered off on his own, she finds him in the lab and announces that she managed to schedule an appointment with the Great Teacher for 6 months from now. It's only then that she notices Lo Tully is already sitting in a chair talking with the professor himself. When Newman formally introduces himself, Luke, who hadn't recognized him at first, hits the floor in complete shock. After recovering, she asks if he's available to analyze Lo's prana since other places couldn't do it, including the Voltaire Kingdom's appraisal office, which found the reading too difficult to measure. Professor Newman explains that he was one of the developers of the prana measurement services used by the appraisal offices, but that those functions were simplified for mass production. But with the prototype he has in his lab, they'll be able to perform the analysis. He then asks Lo Tully to activate his ability, and Lo complies. Lo Tully uses his tribe's enchantment, causing a large amount of green prana to pour from his body. The Grand Professor watches the scene, fascinated by the amount of energy he's releasing. Soon after, Lo steps out of the measurement capsule, and Luke congratulates him on a job well done. Starting to present his conclusion, the professor explains that they noticed Lo Tully's prana purity is fluctuating. He clarifies that the higher the prana's purity, the better it is since it increases the effectiveness of his abilities. Although purity can be increased through training and gradual change, Lo's is rising and falling irregularly. Professor Newman continues his explanation, saying this fluctuation is noticeable when the ability is active and that he can tell from the shape of the waves. It seems like Lo's prana wants to enhance its own nature by itself, as if it were a living entity that wants to change its own purity. Our hero then understands that his abilities are evolving on their own, but for now they're still in an incomplete state. He wonders what will happen when his prana is finally complete. Besides purity, the scientist also measured our hero's total prana capacity. Upon hearing the result, Luke asks, shocked, if he really placed third in the rankings. The confirmation leaves her stunned by how incredible Lo Thuli is. She thinks that he could have already been on top of the world if she had met him a year earlier. The dream of going to the Isle of the Gods, which once seemed impossible, suddenly becomes real. Excited, Luke rushes to update Lo's ranking. While Luke can barely contain her surprise, Lo Thuli doesn't seem that impressed. The Grand Professor then tells her she's lucky to have him, since analyzing a prana this absurd would take him forever to do alone. He comments that it would be easier if a certain man were there at times like this, and then mentions the name Jean Contrado, who apparently betrayed him. Hearing the name he recognizes, our hero asks the professor to tell him more about Jen, since he doesn't want to let another clue about the Isle of the Gods slip away. The Grand Professor says there isn't much he can say on the matter. He just says that Jen was an excellent assistant a while back, a unique man who could keep up with him in the lab and even surpassed him in the rankings. However, one day, Jen lost his older brother and disappeared soon after that. Professor Newman states that's all he can say and asks our hero to come back the next day to finish the analysis. Lachalai thanks him for his help. Later, back at the station hotel in the Republic of Aryu, Luke processes the information that Jen was the professor's assistant. She concludes that there are many things they don't know about Ouroboros and that until they find Jin, they won't know what the organization's members have in common. With the results of the analysis, they hope to finally figure out why Ouroboros was after him. Their shared goal is to reach the Isle of the Gods, and our hero really wants to know why Ouroboros is also targeting the same place. Suddenly, a fairy enters the Grand Professor's laboratory. He confronts her, saying he's dedicated 70 years of his life just to research and has no money for thieves like her. The woman replies that they only want the professor's brain and nothing else. She then reveals that Jen was eliminated and that the two of them were comrades. Because of that, she wants Newman to replace him, stating that it will be for the good of the Ouroboros organization. Meanwhile, the woman from the Thuli tribe shows up and goes to the lab to rescue the doctor, but she notices he isn't there. She sees that his cup of coffee was still full and notices signs that someone had been inside the place. The next day, when Luke and Lachley return to the building, they find a scene of complete chaos and immediately ask the staff what's going on. The scientists confirm the great professor was kidnapped. The signs of a struggle in the room left no doubt. No one knew where he was or who was behind the attack, but they had one hope. They had planted a microtransmitter in the professor's glasses. At first, the device was used to find him when he got lost in his thoughts and wandered off aimlessly. But now, everyone knew the situation was much more serious. Realizing the enemy must be powerful to have broken into the place, Luke and Lothuli decided to rescue Newman themselves. To help them, they received a tactical analysis lens, a high-tech device capable of visualizing the flow of prana and tracking the professor's location. The transmitter's signal led them to a sinister-looking abandoned house. As soon as they entered, they saw several fresh footprints on the floor. A moment later, they heard a strange noise along with signs of prana coming from inside the building. Suddenly, came face to face with several pranics that immediately started to attack. Lo Thuli reacted with agility, dodging and saving Luke in the process. They noticed the creatures weren't using prana to communicate externally, which meant they weren't being controlled remotely. Instead, they were acting on their own, just like the lab receptionist. Our protagonist thought it would be terrifying if that thing had multiplied, but since they were just puppets, he didn't feel threatened. He then charged his explosive sword with power and used the devastation technique, defeating several puppets at once. Even though there were many enemies, Lo Thuli showed no fear. Meanwhile, Luke used the lens and noticed a different prana signal coming from the direction of a door, pointing to a suspicious path. They started to head that way, with Lo Thuli channeling prana into his feet to run at an extremely high speed. Jen's puppets started firing at them to try and stop them, but the pair managed to dodge and spot the door at the end of the hallway. It was then that the walls started to close in, trying to crush them. Luke quickly used the lens to find a weak spot and realized the walls weren't mechanical. Instead, they were completely wrapped in writhing prana. With no time to think, Lo Thuli grabbed his Nirvana sword and unleashed a powerful prana slash, which caused a massive impact and destroyed the entire area. Amid the devastation, a woman appeared, noting that the unwanted guests had been caught in her web. She introduced herself as Luvia, a member of Erebros, and welcomed Lo Tully, saying she had heard about him from Genoine. The wild ranker, however, noticed her fairy wings were fake and asked about her relationship with Jen Contrado. Luvia replied that they were from the same organization, and that she was very sad to hear he had passed away. She then revealed that Jen Contrado was dead, which was news to Lothuli. Luvia explained that a cellular beetle released by Jen right after his death had reached her, and it was through the beetle that she found out about Lothuli's existence. She added that she was surprised he had found this place. Our hero retorted that he just followed the transmitter signal, arguing that the title of Great Professor wasn't just for show and that he would obviously keep a tracker for emergencies. Luke, however, corrected him, saying the transmitter was there because of the professor's habit of wandering off. Anyway, Lo Tully grabbed his sword and ordered her to release Professor Newman. Luvia refused, saying she couldn't do that until he fulfilled his purpose. At that moment, her wings began to glow intensely, and a sparkling dust hung in the air, preventing our hero from drawing his sword from its sheath. Finally, she warned him, saying that Jen didn't lose to him and that he shouldn't underestimate Ouroboros. Lo Tully tried to draw his sword, but his arm was trapped by an invisible force. It was the exact same feeling as when the walls tried to crush them. He realized Luvia's prana was seeping into his weapon. So determined to break free, he started shouting and unleashing a ridiculous amount of his own energy. Luke noticed that his friend's prana was acting like he was using a skill, even though no skill had been activated. With one last thunderous shout, Lo used his raw prana to finally break the spell. He pulled the sword from its sheath with great effort and pointed it right at Luvia. Surprised, Luvia opened her eyes and apologized for underestimating him. Then she proposed a deal. She explained that she couldn't return Professor Newman at that moment, but she would if Lo did her a favor. Luke immediately jumped in, demanding they confirm the professor's safety before any negotiation. Otherwise, the deal would be unfair. Luvia agreed and opened a door, revealing the great professor beaming with happiness, surrounded by equipment that he was thrilled about. Before they could say a word, the professor claimed he was in the middle of the best part of his research and told them to go away, and the door shut. The bizarre scene made Luke wonder if this was even a kidnapping. Lo Tully decided that, for now, they couldn't leave the professor in that situation. Luvia assured him that the professor was just replacing Jen and would be treated with respect. Satisfied with her answer, our hero asked for the terms of the deal. The Ouroboros member revealed that the person who eliminated Jen was an assassin sent from the Island of the Gods, and the favor she was asking was for Lo to capture that person. Seeing that this was a lead that lined up perfectly with his own goals, he accepted the offer. The two then shook hands, sealing the fairy's deal. Luvia began to explain the operation. She knew they were tracking her prana, and that it was only a matter of time before others arrived. As a countermeasure, she had prepared a decoy, leaving a high concentration of her energy in another ruin. Luke immediately understood the strategy. Because she was a fairy, Luvia could transmute her prana into a fine dust to trick her pursuers. This was the first time he had ever seen someone from the fairy tribe, a mystical race that had never been registered in the rankings. Luvia explained that her people weren't interested in worldly affairs, which is why she hid her wings and used false names. Curious, Luke did a quick search and found a record of Luvia from 3 years ago. It listed her as number 1 in prana control before she was removed for disappearing on a mission. She, however, downplayed the achievement, saying she only wanted an ID card and that everyone in her tribe was excellent at it. Luvia admitted that even though she was talented, she was no match for her sister, and said she hoped her sister was also in Ouroboros. Getting back to the plan, Luvia said the assassin would definitely fall for the dust decoy. Lo Thuli understood they needed to set up an ambush to capture him. The fairy gave them the location, saying the target would show up that very night. Later, our protagonist went to the ruins and spotted a hooded person entering the building. Acting fast, he closed in and placed his sword against the figure's neck, ordering them not to move. The woman, however, reacted instantly. She drew her own sword and knocked Lo back with a swift move. After recovering from the impact, our hero noticed that the person had suddenly stopped moving. He seized the opening and charged forward with an attack, but the assassin managed to block the blow, holding her sword firmly. Despite her defense, it was clear she was struggling to move as if something was holding her back. After ripping the hood off the figure, our protagonist is shocked to see it's Yuna, his very own sister. She immediately starts running and he desperately chases after her, shouting that he's Lo Tuli, her brother. Yuna leaps off the building and starts sprinting across the rooftops, forcing our hero to use prana just to keep up. He has no doubt it's her. He would never mistake his sister for anyone else. Using his deflection skill, Lo makes an incredible leap, much higher than hers, and lands directly in her path, blocking her way. He asks her why she's running, but Yuna doesn't answer. When Lo insists that she talk, his sister begins to use their tribe's enchantment. He immediately recognizes the technique as the heavenly spirit descent, the same skill he has. Knowing the power doesn't last long, he feels bad for Yuna, but decides he needs to restrain her until the effect wears off. Lo uses the lotus flower to counter her attacks, and the two siblings begin to fight. During the fight, he notices that the effect of Yuna's skill isn't weakening. This makes him believe that she's using the perfected form of the heavenly spirit descent. But then suddenly, Yuna starts to fall off the building. Our protagonist tells her to wait and tries to grab her hand, but she just vanishes into thin air as she falls. In that moment, Lo understands the terrible truth. The assassin from the island of the gods who killed Jen was Yuna. Frustrated, he lets out a scream of anguish, unleashing a huge amount of prana. The fairy appears and welcomes our hero back, but she quickly realizes from his reaction that things didn't go well. Furious, Lo Tuli grabs her by the neck and asks what she was looking for. He demands to know if she already knew he was chasing Yuna. Luvia replies that she doesn't know what he's talking about and that he simply found the assassin she mentioned. He explains that the assassin is someone he knows. She's a childhood friend who was abducted by the island of the gods years ago, which has left him completely devastated. Luvia admits it was just a coincidence and that the chances of this happening were low. Realizing how aggressive he was being, our hero apologizes, saying he didn't mean to hurt the fairy. The girl, however, confronts him with the fact that Yuna killed someone. He argues that his sister would never do that, but the fairy makes him wonder if she really hasn't changed and if she's still the same person she used to be. Our hero starts to spiral thinking about it and asks what she plans to do when she captures Yuna. The fairy reveals that she had planned on getting revenge, but she decided against it because it would break Lothuli's heart. Loth points out the contradiction in her words since she threatens people, but then talks about avenging a comrade. Luvia then explains that Ouroboros is her family, a group of weaklings who can only protect themselves by working together. They're exiles who have lost their place in the world. That's why they don't hesitate to commit crimes. If they don't, they'll never be able to achieve their dream. Just then, the surrounding walls start to move, leaving everyone in shock. The fairy wonders if the professor made something new. When she opens the door, she sees that he's knocked a bunch of things onto the floor. But the professor is celebrating, saying he finally managed to complete something. He claims it was really easy to make and shows off a piece of metal. The theory Jen left behind was correct. By colliding prana waves and annihilating their target, he managed to create a prana nullification device. The professor reveals that his great work, the Heavenfall Wedge, is finally complete. This was the trump card the fairy had been waiting for, a weapon powerful enough to take down the Isle of the Gods. Luvia thanks the professor immensely, but he explains that Jen's blueprints were perfect and he just put them into practice. For him, it was a final collaboration with his foolish apprentice, feeling as if he'd finally gotten to talk with Jen after a long time. With that, the fairy turns to Lo Tully and invites him to join their forces. She explains that the biggest risk now is having the newly completed Heavenfall Wedge destroyed, and to prevent that, they need to eliminate Jen's killer. The prana baits Luvia left behind were destroyed one after another, indicating that Lo's childhood friend would be there soon. Therefore, she needed his help to intercept the assassin, promising she wouldn't kill Yuna, only incapacitate her. Knowing he couldn't stop his sister alone in her current state, our hero agrees. While they wait in meditation, they see a hooded Yuna approaching the building. Before the fight begins, Luvia decides to reveal a dark secret about the Isle of the Gods. They brainwashed the humans they captured, turning them into soldiers. She believes Yuna probably went through the same process. If her goal is to eliminate any threat to the island, the professor also becomes a target since a mind capable of creating such weapons is a huge nuisance to them. Our hero remembers Jen mentioning the island's barbaric acts and asks if kidnapping people and turning them into weapons was what he meant. However, Luvia says that's not all, explaining that the sins of that place are rooted much deeper. At that moment, Luke announces they've finally reached the ruin, and the two of them prepare for the imminent battle with Yuna. The protagonist's sister appears, emanating an immense amount of prana, and lunges at Luvia with a sword strike. Our hero reacts quickly and defends the attack with his own sword, realizing he doesn't want to hurt his childhood friend. Luvia, however, says that's a shame because now he's on her side. Next, the fairy throws some magic powders and uses them to attack Yuna with rocks, but the girl cuts through the projectiles with ease. The fairy then understands why Yuna was chosen as a soldier. Seizing the opportunity, our protagonist appears behind Yuna and uses a technique from the Sword Saint style, unleashing a gale slash that knocks a pillar down toward his sister. Yuna manages to block the pillar's impact using her sword and both hands for support. However, this was just a distraction so our hero could use the Devastation Blast Blade directly on her back. The blow lands a direct hit charged with a lot of prana and destroys the rest of the pillar, but Yuna manages to dodge it awkwardly. After the dodge, he charges forward and the two clash their steel blades. In the middle of the clash, he yells for Luvia to use a powerful attack even if he gets caught in the blast. Answering his call, the fairy begins to cast her spell, conjuring several glowing orbs and moving the stones of the ruins with her magic. She forms a giant stone hand and tries to crush Yuna like a fly. However, the girl's prana explodes and completely shatters the stone hand. Right after that, our hero and his sister use Heavenly Spirit Descent against each other, exchanging a series of sword attacks while both of them perfectly defend every blow. Our hero doesn't want his prana to be released, so he keeps the skill active since Yuna can do the same. He notices that their interrupted skills have finally stabilized. Meanwhile, Yuna realizes that Lo is learning just by watching her prana, admitting to herself that he's an incredible swordsman. Right after that, they trade a few more sword strikes and get into an absurd clash of magic. As long as the Heavenly Spirit Descent is active, they're both invincible. Watching from a distance, Luke realizes that no one can interfere in their fight at this point because the battle has become a world of its own, belonging only to them. The battle continues until Lo notices that the technique Yuna has been using for so long seems strange. Suddenly, his consciousness starts getting pulled towards something, and in the blink of an eye, he finds himself in Tori village. Confused, our hero asks who's there, and a figure introduces himself as Nimrod, who welcomes him and calls him brother. He explains that this place is Babel, a world built to challenge the gods. Nimrod reveals that Babel is the home of the ancestors they had heard about, and that the souls of the Babel tribe are completely intertwined in the absolute depths of this world. He explains that when someone's prana purity reaches its limit, only their mind is invited to this place, and it's because of his pure prana that Lo Thuli is here. Nimrod then comments that Lo's prana has a beautiful color, and that a young woman with the same color was here before at the same age as him. Our hero immediately understands he's talking about Yuna and asks if Nimrod knows his sister. Nimrod confirms that he does, saying that Yuna was there looking for power. He remembers that she had very sad eyes and that deep down, she didn't truly want that strength. Pointing to a light in the sky, Nimrod says that's the power he was talking about, a power that exists to defeat the gods. Generations of the Babel tribe shattered their own souls to store that light. He continues his explanation, saying that those who connect to Babel can borrow a fraction of this power. But on the other hand, those who fall along the way end up becoming part of this world. This is the art of the Babel tribe called Reborn Genesis, the record of the battle to restart the world of humans. Nimrod says the gods fear this power, and that's why they try to eradicate the descendants of Babel. He then asks if our protagonist needs power, saying he's free to take it. Without hesitating, our hero replies that he desperately needs that power to save someone precious to him and asks Nimrod to lend it to him. Nimrod allows him to take the power, but warns him not to take all of it as his body wouldn't be able to handle the full load. Besides, if he did, the world of Babel would disappear completely. So our hero begins to absorb the power of hope, and his body starts to radiate more and more prana. Back in reality, Luke is in shock when he sees the amount of aura he's releasing. The protagonist's light illuminates the entire area, making the fairy ask if they're really safe there. Luke, however, believes they won't be affected because Lo's arts only eliminate those who threaten his survival, and they aren't direct threats. The only one directly affected is Yuna, who starts to feel an overwhelming fear as her skills are erased one by one. She realizes that Lo managed to connect with Babel. Luvia understands that Yuna wasn't able to absorb such an absurd amount of power. This confirms what she always said. When Lo gets serious, he becomes stronger than anyone. However, once his task is complete, he deactivates all his prana. With her skills erased, Yuna finally collapses and our hero rushes to her side. However, the moment Lo places his hands on Yuna's face, she suddenly wakes up and attacks him. Just as the girl is about to strike him with her sword, Luvia steps in, activating an aura ability that hits Yuna directly. The ability causes Yuna's prana to start dissolving, and soon after, she passes out again from a lack of energy. Luvia then explains that the only flaw in her technique is the need to set the target's coordinates. This is why she can only use this ability when she has an enemy cornered to the point where they can no longer move. Believing the situation is resolved, Lo Thuli finally thinks he'll be able to talk to his sister. However, Luvia quickly shatters his hope, telling him he'll have to wait a few more years for that. She says she's going to hand Yuna over to Ouroboros and tells Lo to wait for 3 years before trying to talk to her. During that time, Luvia plans to study her completely, since Yuna is a precious specimen for having gone to the island of the gods and returned alive. Hearing this, our hero finally realizes that Ouroboros is an organization that doesn't care what methods it uses. He regrets not figuring this out from the start and declares that their temporary alliance is over. Lo confidently declares that he's taking Yuna back with him and immediately starts a fight against Luvia.